Yes. Good evening and welcome to the December 8th meeting for the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive or also access via the live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including comments on cases. At this time, if you'll please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Beal, turn time over to you for roll call.
Mr. Snare?
Here.
Ms. Call?
Here.
Mr. Supelak?
Here.
Mr. Way?
Here.
Mr. Fishman?
Here.
Mr. Shanag?
Here.
Ms. Harder?
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. There are no minutes for this evening's approval, but I will entertain a motion to accept the documents into the record. Do I have a first?
Motion to accept documents.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. Ms. Beal.
Mr. Shanag?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman? Mr. Way?
Yes.
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 Thank you, Ms. Beal. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when making recommendations on matters of rezoning and planning of property. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. For these administrative cases, anyone who intends to address the Commission must be sworn in. There are no cases eligible tonight for the consent agenda. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. The meeting procedure for reviewing cases this evening will begin with a staff presentation, followed by the opportunity of the applicant to make a presentation. The Commission will then have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions of both staff and the applicant. The Commission will then hear any public comment. We ask that all public comment be provided at the podium, and each speaker provide their name and address for the record. Please press the button on the microphone and ensure the green light on the microphone is lit prior to speaking. Following public comment, the Commission will enter into deliberation on the case prior to rendering a decision. Back to administrative cases. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of the administrative cases this evening, will you please stand and raise your right hand and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this Commission?
Yes.
Thank you. Tonight, we have an informal case, Dublin Village Apartments at PID 273-009045, and case 22-163 CP Concept Plan. Mr. Will, this application I believe you will be presenting. This application is a request for the redevelopment of an existing 229 space surface parking lot and the construction of a new 6-story corridor building with 301 multifamily units, approximately 12,000 square foot of ground floor commercial space, and a 453 space parking structure internal to the building on an approximately 3.85 acre site. And we will excuse Mr. Supalack, who has recused himself from the hearing of this case, and turn our time over to Mr. Will.
Good evening and thank you. This development is proposed within the Bridge Street District. Development in the Bridge Street District follows a 3-step approval process with an informal optional step before this. This case is a concept plan. The purpose of the concept plan is to outline the character and nature of the proposed development, including looking at building mass, open space location, and street network. A determination is required by the commission for this case type. This case was previously in front of the commission on May 5th of this year for an informal review, which we will look into in the presentation. Oops. So the site highlighted here in yellow, roughly 3.85 acres, located southeast of Village Parkway and Tuller Road intersection, is within the Dublin Village, previously the Dublin Village Center, which was approved previously back in 1987. Here you can see an aerial showing the existing conditions of the site looking to the southwest. In the foreground is the site, the parking lot with approximately 230 parking spaces. In the background from left to right, you can see the existing AMC Theater, Greystone Muse, and Towns on the Parkway, which was recently approved. There's also of note an electric easement, a 60-foot wide overhead electric easement to the east of the site, highlighted here in yellow. The Bridge Street District Code creates a collection of neighborhoods, and with that are neighborhood standards. This site is located within the Sawmill Center neighborhood. With the standards are also a conceptual development framework which looks into the precise location of the street network, shopping corridors, open spaces, and gateways, as shown here in the graphic to the right. The Bridge Street District also creates a street network and a framework to provide the streets within a hierarchy of requirements. As illustrated here, these create a walkable block system and provide for vehicular circulation to and within the district. So case history, the informal proposal from May 2022 of this year, which the commission reviewed, the applicant proposed 2 7-story podium apartment buildings with 278 units, as well as 2 3-story single-family attached building townhome style with 14 units, as well as the extension of McCune and John Shields Parkway, as well as proposing expanded modifications to existing parking or surface parking lots. The commission provided non-binding feedback, as this was an informal, summarized here for the commission tonight. The commission was supportive of the residential and the apartments and townhomes as the primary use, but encouraged ground floor activation of the buildings. They supported the extension of John Shields Parkway and McCune, but asked for a north-south connection as well. They also supported the creation of multiple blocks, but emphasized the need to improve the walkability of the plan. The commission also encouraged the applicant to create meaningful connected open spaces, and they expressed concerns that the open spaces might not meet the open space type requirements of the code. Additionally, the commission was supportive of the structured parking, but highlighted the need to see or understand how the shared parking throughout this development, along with the other tenants of Dublin Village, might work. They expressed the importance of neighborhood context in evaluating the proposed building heights, and cited that with the existing development as proposed, it might not fit the existing neighborhood fabric in terms of building heights. They also provided feedback for massing and encouraged the applicant to explore how the development, the edges transition to the surrounding areas for the proposed development, and then express the usefulness of seeing a framework plan to see the long-term vision of the site. The applicant did provide a framework which was provided to the commission. This is for a reference purposes and is not being asked to be reviewed or voted or approved this evening, but does show a long-term vision of the applicant for the redevelopment of the Dublin Village area. So shown here is the concept plan proposed in front of the commission tonight. The applicant is now proposing a single 6-story corridor building with 301 multifamily units, as well as approximately 12,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, as well as 453 parking spaces within a parking structure internal to the building. Shown here is a side-by-side comparison for the commission. At left is the concept plan tonight, and at right is the May 22 informal review, seeing the one building to the left and the multiple buildings on the right. So a foundational component of the BSD code is the creation of lots and blocks, which guide and frame development. The code prescribes standards for block size as well as block perimeter. Within the Sawmill Center neighborhood, there is a block size for each block side of 500 feet and the perimeter of 1,750 feet. The proposed development meets the perimeter block lengths or block total, but the east and west block faces exceed the 500 feet maximum as illustrated here. Shown here is an example of how the code would prescribe breaking this block into two so that all sides would meet or not exceed the 500 feet maximum. And the purpose of the block size from the code or the intent is to create walkable block sizes and walkability, which is a fundamental issue or a fundamental piece of the Bridge Street District vision. The lots and blocks also provide a framework for creating streets and street connections. The BSD code, as mentioned, provides a framework to provide the street network to facilitate both vehicular and pedestrian circulation. It also provides guidance on principal frontage streets. Here you can see dashed potential future streets within the street network, which is part of the city's thoroughfare plan. There is an extension of the John Shields Parkway, as mentioned, and a north-south neighborhood street extension, as well as the applicant is showing the potential realignment of the Village Parkway Tuller Road intersections. However, the applicant is no longer proposing the east-west extension of McCune Avenue, which was shown previously. In terms of access, the code also prescribes requirements as well. The applicant is proposing 2 driveways from the north-south street, the new north-south street, into the parking structure, as well as 1 entry drive from Village Parkway. Vehicular access is not permitted from a principal frontage street, which Village Parkway is. Instead, access should be shown from a neighborhood street or a non-principal frontage street, similar as they're showing from the north-south street. Shown here is a conceptual building mass. The code prescribes requirements for building type and building mass and character. The applicant is proposing the 6-story corridor building. The corridor building type is a permitted building within the Sawmill Center neighborhood district, and corridor buildings are permitted to be between 3 and a maximum of 6 stories, which this building is. However, the code also prescribes building compatibility to ensure harmonious features of new development to make sure it aligns with existing development. So this is the building compatibility or incompatibility. The corridor building is not a compatible building to the single-family attached development type, which is approved from the towns on the Parkway, as shown here. You can highlight it. To the right of the screen is the concept plan site boundary with the building footprint highlighted in yellow. To the yellow to the left and highlighted at the same scale as the site of the proposed concept plan superimposed over the towns on the Parkway. This, you can see the different kind of open spaces and scale and character of the building. This is here for the commission to consider that if the buildings are compatible and if they complete a character that's harmonious. Sorry. Some further analysis, which also shows the concept plan site boundary superimposed on Tuller Flats, which is a few blocks away from the site, just to see the different building type and massing and the different character that it creates. And then also here shown in Bridge Park and Block C, which are some of the larger buildings which we approved through the Bridge Street District, with Block C having 4 buildings, also a street and open spaces, and breaking up the block and making it more walkable. Shown here is some of the conceptual architecture of the proposed corridor building. The top is the west elevation, which is along Village Parkway, and the south image is the east elevation along the proposed north-south street. The applicant is proposing a modern application of traditional Dublin materials of brick, stone, and glass. They also break up the vertical and horizontal architecture of the building with stoops, storefronts, balconies. The building is divided into a base, middle, and top, which helps create a nice architectural pattern. Also shown here is some more conceptual architecture from the applicant. Top is the north elevation along Tuller Road, and south elevation is along John Shields Parkway. Again, carrying on the middle, or the base, middle, and top division of architecture and high quality materials. And lastly, some more rendered, refined imagery, conceptual architecture. The image at left showing the intersection of Village Parkway and John Shields looking to the northeast, and then at right would be along John Shields Parkway to the view to the north. So the code prescribes parking requirements, both minimums and maximums. This development would require a minimum of 399 spaces and would allow a maximum of 652 spaces. The proposed number of spaces is within this figure. The code also prescribes requirements for open space. For quantity, the required open space would be roughly 60,000 square feet. But the code also requires quality requirements in the space types. The intent is this to provide meaningful gathering space, and it provides requirements for sizes, dimensions, placement, and allowable impervious surfaces. The applicant is proposing to meet portions of this open space requirement through the use of the existing plaza in front of the AMC Theater, highlighted in green and dashed in red with the outline at the bottom of this screen. Open spaces are allowed to count towards the open space requirements upon the commission's approval. The applicant is also proposing to meet the open space quantity requirements with the use of the John Shields Trail along the south sides of John Shields Parkway extension. This is not an open space type that the code considers, so we could not count that towards the open space requirement. And then highlighted in blue around the periphery of the building are other places or spaces rather that the applicant is proposing to create open spaces. The applicant provided conceptual sketches and imagery of proposed open space typology. Shown here is along the John Shields Parkway. You can see the right-of-way line where it would potentially be between the building. They're proposing potential private patio as well as walkways to storefronts. The commission has previously defined what public means and what is private, and also that walkways are not typically counted as public open space. They're more of a site or internal circulation. So some of these spaces would not be considered to count towards the quantity open space calculations as well. Similarly, here is shown some linear open spaces along the Village Parkway streetscape, showing kind of entrances into stoops and storefronts, as well as the break in the building and the streetscape for the private drive into the auto court in the parking structure below. Shown here is the conceptual open space plan along Tuller. Again, there are some open spaces that are showing pathways to stoops or private residence or common residential entries. these areas wouldn't be able to count towards that open space requirement. And then along the north-south street, north is pointing to your left, showing tree lawns, benches, and other streetscape elements is along this. It is not the purpose of the concept plan to approve the final open space requirements, but it is the use of the concept plan to ensure that the proposal could provide meaningful open space requirements that meet both the quantity and quality requirements. Additionally, the applicant is proposing a residential amenity deck. This would be elevated on the 3rd floor and include pool and other amenities for guests and residents. They are not proposing that this count towards the open space requirements. The concept plan was reviewed against the code criteria, and though the residential use aligns with the code and the high quality architecture is in line with Dublin's high expectation, the lots and blocks and street types, which are fundamental issues of the code, as well as the building type and character, do not align. And because of this, staff is recommending to the commission a disapproval. With that, thank you. Staff is here to answer questions, and the applicant is also here with us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Will. For this application, we're going to handle questions for staff and applicants separately, though I imagine there will be some blending of the two as we progress into our meeting. So looking to the commission for questions for staff at this time. Mr. Schneer.
Quick question. What's the city's plans with regard to the extension of John Shields if this application weren't pending?
My colleague Tina will help answer this.
Hi, Tina Waskowitz with the Division of Transportation and Mobility. Good evening. We have looked at the John Shields Parkway extension since basically the beginning of the Bridge Street District layout and the network that you see in the code today. One of the more recent iterations of that was with the Sawmill Road Corridor Study. And that study actually suggests routing John Shields Parkway to intersect at Snoffer and Sawmill, which is a little bit of a variation from what is in the current Bridge Street Code street network. And as far as programming and planning, we don't have anything funded for that section. We would look to development to partner on improvements in this area.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Way.
I have some more transportation traffic related questions. So Dina, you may want to come back up. So I know I asked this question at the last meeting about Village Parkway and the realignment of the curve to be would that be part of this project, or would that be something that would happen in the future?
So we haven't gotten to that level of detail. My initial thought on that is that it would stay in its current curved alignment with this project proposal and would likely be realigned with a potential bridge crossing of I-270. Again, that's one that we don't have the construction dollars in the CIP for a timeline on that project, but we are advancing the preliminary design phase.
But as we're reviewing the project, we should review it with the intention that it's going to happen, right?
I would say that is a likely scenario, but that it would potentially still be in the roadway could still be in its current location as this site develops. So maybe thinking about it under both scenarios.
And is Village Parkway meant to be widened as part of that reconfiguration? Because I'm seeing a curb line. I'm seeing two different curb lines in the drawings. I
don't think we're to that level of detail, and maybe the applicant can speak to that in their drawing.
I'm just trying to find out what's public space versus what's the development space. So I'm not clear right now on that. So
I'm sorry.
So again, because there could be a future. It looks like there's future widening that on the drawings that I'm seeing, that so that the the right-of-way is expanding, which would, right now they're showing a large green space along Village Parkway with trees in it, but I think that's all considered public right-of-way. That's what I'm reading in the drawings.
Do you guys know? I'm okay.
Welcome, Mr. Hendershot.
Good evening. I believe the layout that the applicant is showing, I don't think that is based on any city information at this point. Again, what Tina just mentioned, we're not to that level of detail to understand what the width of Village Parkway may be. So that may be a question to the applicant of why they're showing it the way that they are.
Additionally, then just looking as our role in Planning and Zoning Commission and looking at the concept plan tonight, understanding that there is no firm direct, this is what that future is going to look like. However, we have gone through recent studies as to what the future may hold.
Correct.
So these don't reflect really the city's input at this point?
Correct.
Okay, that helps clarify that. The other question I had was the proposed public drive on the east side. They're showing diagonal parking, at least in, I think, the version that I'm looking at. Is that a city standard to have parallel parking on one side and diagonal parking on the other?
No, so that's something that we identified with the applicant. So our expectation would be to have parallel parking on both sides of the street, which would be consistent with our streetscape character guidelines for the Bridge Street District, as well as being consistent with the rest of development within the Bridge Street District.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Ms. Harder.
I just had a quick question. When you are fact-finding and doing your studies, are you going to determine how long it takes to get from this area to 270 and timing? Does that become part of that information down the road?
Yes, I mean, that is certainly something that would be looked at. I think the funding mechanism for that is also part of the discussion, trying to understand where, when, as far as getting funding for any potential projects. So those things would certainly be contemplated as a project would move forward.
And then, Mr. Will, could you just add a little bit of clarification there? What types of application trigger the requirement of a traffic study?
Sorry.
So within the Bridge Street District, there were 2 traffic studies performed with the original Bridge Street District rezoning. So if there are any deviations from the assumptions within those 2 studies, that's what triggers the need for further analysis from a traffic standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Hendershot. Mr. Way.
One other question about John Shields Parkway. As you go to the west, John Shields Parkway has parking on it on both sides. But what I'm seeing in the drawings here is there is not proposed on-street parking going to the east of Village Parkway.
Right. So again, we're at a concept plan level, but we have communicated with the applicant that our expectation is to have on-street parking on both sides of all streets to be consistent with the Bridge Street District standards. This site is a little bit unique where you have an existing development to the south, the AMC Theater, where that is not part of this application, obviously. So there's consideration of there's some constraints as far as fitting in John Shields Parkway. So that is something that we would continue to work with the applicant on to see if there's opportunities to provide on-street parking, and potentially, if not, if there's a way to provide that in the future. So setting up an alignment to allow for that in the future if that's something that we determined was acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Hendershot. Mr. Chinook.
This might be a question for the applicant, but I have a quick question. The 450 parking spaces that's committed to the theater, the AMC Theater, how does that factor into this development?
So at this level of the concept plan, we're not looking too hard at the parking and then how a shared parking arrangement might work with the other existing tenant spaces along there. As we might move to a preliminary or final development plan, we'd ask for more detailed parking information and how that operations might work. Any reciprocal easement or relationships would be a private matter with the applicant and AMC, and I'd invite them to answer that at any time.
So then from a process standpoint, isn't that kind of challenging for us to move forward with this plan, not understanding what's going to happen with all that parking that's being absorbed by this project? Is that a rhetorical question?
The applicant has identified that the other 2,500 parking spaces within the Devlin Village might absorb some of those, but there's not been a parking arrangement or parking plan proposed or reviewed. Correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Well, could you bring back up the drawing that gives an overview of open spaces, proposed open spaces? So the AMC Theater in green there, I imagine that we would identify the principal residential entrance as on, looking at the screen, the upper left, kind of mid-left of the block. Do you know the distance in feet along the pedestrian way to that AMC proposed open space?
So the code would require it to be within, I think, 600 feet of the primary entrance. 660. Thank you for that clarification. I do not know the exact measurement of that, but that is something that the commission would definitely consider in the proposed using of the existing open space to count towards the open space requirements.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission for staff? Mr. Way.
Yeah, going back to the John Shields Parkway and how it might realign with Sawmill, and we're hearing it's now for not where the current Bridge Street plan shows it. The applicant in their in the master plan, if you will, did not show it in that alignment. Did they know that there was a change in the alignment?
I should have stood up earlier. Yes. We've had a few discussions about that with this team, and they are taking a broader look at how those connections get made in relationship to both this site that's in front of you tonight and other areas that are under their control. There's not been definitive direction from the city or the development team on exactly how that alignment will travel eastward from this site to Sawmill, but that's something that we definitely have a close eye on and will want to continue to coordinate as the projects develop.
The Snauffer connection, because you've got an intersection, makes a lot of sense, but it really does reroute it.
It does.
So
it does. It makes it challenging, but it does provide that nice access from Sawmill. So that's the balance there that needs to be struck. Exactly.
And I just wanted to raise that in the context of we have a plan in front of us that may not be exactly the way that it evolves. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Way. Any other questions for staff at this time? Thank you, Mr. Way. Hello, welcome, Aaron. I'll invite you up to introduce yourself and your team this evening. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Call. Aaron Underhill with Underhill and Hodge at 8000 Walton Parkway in New Albany. And with me are a cast of thousands, Michael Feit, Matt Stavroff, Kevin McCauley, and others. We've got our architects here this evening. So obviously very important project for our team. Seeing Mr. Will and hearing him give his report and then seeing Kim Way here reminds me of the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way. And we have a will and a way here tonight. So hopefully that's a positive vibe we're creating with that. But we do believe there's a way here tonight to begin transforming Dublin Village Center into something that has really been envisioned for quite a long time now. And if we all have the will to do it, to be creative and to sort of understand the reasons behind some of the ways we're not meeting the code, I think we're going to get somewhere. And so I want to take some time to talk about how we've taken your feedback from May very seriously and worked for 7 months here to come up with what is a really different plan. And we have reduced building height. We've provided retail and restaurant uses along the major streets to create the vibrancy we're asking for. The previous plan had 2 parking garages in a podium configuration. And there were, in some instances, exposures of 3 of those sides to the perimeters, and that was seen as too much. So we now have a one parking garage underneath the building, which with a partially submerged below grade story of parking and then one above. And we have only exposed that parking garage on one side of the building. So hopefully that's addressed that concern. And we have put together a very conceptual master plan to provide some context in this proposal. Mr. Fight will come up shortly and walk you through that. Understanding it is conceptual, I think we made that very clear, but hopefully that will provide you with some more context, as I mentioned. So we were very surprised when continuing to work with staff over the past many months that in receiving positive feedback that the staff report came out with a recommendation of disapproval. And truth be told, I can see why this was resolved in some ways, only because the staff's function is to compare what's being proposed to code. And in that light, I guess we didn't check enough boxes. But I do think the last time around, we had a recognition that some flexibility is needed here. I think, that was part of what we were saying the last time, was that with all of the built conditions here and some other things that I'm going to walk through, it's very difficult to do something here that completely meets code, given that we're not in a green field, which is what we found we've found to be the case throughout Bridge Street's history for the most part, going all the way down to Bridge Park. So I know the last time you all recognized that there would be some significant deviations in some instances from code, but we hope that they're justified and warranted, and we hope to convince you of that this evening. I mentioned that there is a ton of history here, and there are many challenges resulting from that. When the property was purchased in 2009 by the Stavroffs, we were just getting out of the Great Recession. The economy was sputtering along, and so was this center. Very high vacancy rates, as high as 40%. And surprising to me, these gentlemen told me that some rents were less than $1 per square foot at that time, if you can imagine. So in the midst of all of that, we also had a very specific PUD zoning in place that is kind of the way it used to be around here when everything was PUD. So that purchase came in the midst of the visioning for Bridge Street sort of taking its birth. And it wasn't until sometime in the second quarter of 2012 before the visioning plan was adopted, a zoning code was created, et cetera. And so Stavroff was left with kind of being in a purgatory, if you will, of needing to clean up a center under, kind of an old set of regulations. And that, of course, led itself to having to enter into new leases and things that were rather lengthy, tied our hands, et cetera. And so, as a result, we've always had a grave concern on our side that we'd ever be able to do anything that really met the intent of Bridge Street. And I think we found the opportunity here with this particular location. It's not without its problems in terms of kind of a box we've been put into by no. I mean, I don't want to say it's anybody's fault, but the existing conditions are the existing conditions. The blanket rezoning of the property here immediately created a lot of nonconformities, legal nonconformities. But as you are well aware with your zoning code and most zoning codes, what that does is it ties your hands in terms of being able to enlarge uses, to alter them. And you reach a certain threshold that's not very high, you end up having to just stick with what you have. And so really the stars need to align in terms of having leasing arrangements where, particular areas aren't needed for parking anymore under leases, have the, where in some instances, if these other buildings are going to redevelop those leases, you have to be very strategic about when you have them terminate or expire. And a lot of things have to come together. So we're very, we have recently renegotiated a deal with AMC Theaters relating to the redesign, relatively recently. And there are all sorts of parking requirements that go along with that. I think the Stavroff team's been very creative in terms of providing a parking plan. I know that was a question. I'll let others answer that later about how we can accommodate the parking that's required under that lease while still bringing a viable and vibrant development here. As to the issue raised in the staff report, I also wanted to mention, that we do have this large power line running north-south through this property. And boy, It'd been a while since I'd been out there in person, and I was out to meet with these gentlemen last week, and boy, that's really an impediment to this entire site, and I think it's driving some of our decision making. So I don't know if you've been out there, but those poles are pretty decent size, and it's a pretty decent width out there of part of the property that otherwise would be usable. So in terms of the issues raised in the staff report, one of those is that the east and west block lengths exceed 500 feet. One of those is only by 13 feet. The other is by 72 feet. I think this is a situation where we have all these existing conditions. We have Taller Road on the north. We have John Shields Parkway that really only has one route where it can go between the AMC Theater and as it goes eastward a little bit, it has to bend around the other existing building to the east of us. So that really was a difficult engineering feat to try to get through there in a manner that meets all of the city's standards or close to it. And so that has really defined that block length on both sides, just due to those geometries. So I think you would agree that one's a pretty easy one to maybe overcome. Now, we also recognize that we're not extending McCune Avenue, and that issue in and of itself affects the other item where we're having these longer lengths than we're supposed to per code. But several things going on that influenced our decision on that. One was the utility line and the utility pole location on the site. It is nearly exactly in the way of where that intersection would be. So it would require, it would be offset a little bit. It's going to dead end into an existing building that quite frankly is going to be there for quite a long time. The code does recognize that where existing barriers limit extension of the street networks, blocks shall be created to match the above requirements where they can, but barriers such as some of the things I've mentioned would allow for an exemption or waiver. Another thing, when we went out and when we talked to AMC about our first plan and after, that was ongoing when we were here last time, but they were not excited at all about 2 parking garages and providing some shared parking. We were providing them some shared parking in the northernmost building. That distance was too far for them to want their patrons to walk. So that's another thing influencing this, is that we wanted to provide them with parking in other locations and eliminate sort of that walk. And we'll be accommodating that through some of their use of the southern part of the garage in the building, but also largely in other places on the property. I wanted to speak also in the context of McCune Avenue. Village Parkway, as we just all heard, is there's a thought it may have a bridge over 270. And one of the purposes of the study I saw, at least, was to try to relieve some of the traffic that's on Sawmill Road. And I think the number I saw is it could maybe lessen the use of Sawmill Road by up to 20%, which would be pretty significant. But if you look at where the crossing is likely to be, which is, Village Parkway, just to the north of us, if you come down come southward over that bridge, within a pretty short distance, our estimate is about 100 feet, you will hit Taller Road. Within another 250 feet beyond that would be McCune if it were there. And then within another 250 feet of that is John Shields Parkway. So on a street that is supposed to take on a lot of traffic and take some of that volume off of Sawmill, it's our view that having that many conflict points is not the right thing to do and will actually cause congestion along that should it ever happen. We realize it's in a plan now, and but we think that's something to really take into consideration with this site, that adding another intersection there would really create some conflicts, we believe. Last thing I'm going to get to is the incompatibility of the building type under the code with the Pulte project to the west. And this one's very interesting to me. The Bridge Street Corridor study on page 46 specifically references Dublin Village Center, and it says, high density is essential to providing enough people and activities within walking distance to keep the district vibrant and full of choices 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. High density also plays a key role in creating sufficient development to fund structured parking and other essential, and another essential ingredient to compact and make it a walkable district. Density and walkability are the foundations of the market opportunity in this district, and without them, the market will only support lower value, auto-oriented development patterns that exist in this area today. Well, obviously, when we're talking about the first building coming out of the ground and needing it to be very dense, when you have a limited amount of property to work with all of these constraints, it needs to have a bigger massing and it needs to be a little taller. We have brought the building down from 7 stories to a 6-story building at its peak here. I would offer that if we were here first and Pulte came second, they'd be the ones not able to, if you follow the code precisely, that they wouldn't have been able to do that project because it would have been incompatible that way. I think this site is being penalized because it came second if we're going to go down that path. And the reason it's going second is because all of the problems that have been, applicable to it over the long run. So, nothing more that these gentlemen would have rather done than to redevelop this sooner than they did, but there was a lot going against it. So I think when you're considering that aspect, please could take that into consideration. With that being said, we'll be ready for a Q&A here pretty soon, but I'd like to ask Michael Feit to come up and talk about the concept plan for the larger development.
Thank you, Aaron. Michael Feit, F2 Companies, 1515 Lakeshore Drive, Columbus. Wow, I guess is all I can say. I personally, and I know our team, wanted to come and have a much more positive vibe than we're having right now. We've been working very hard and diligently to get there. And I have a whole script and pictures and everything to show about how all the positive things about the project. And we start out with what seems to be a lot of negative things, a lot of reasons why it doesn't work. So I'm going to try to circle back to those and answer those questions, but I'd like to start with what I heard the board ask for last time when we were here, which is, what are you trying to do with the bigger picture? And maybe that'll get people's mindset more into a positive way. We certainly want to get out of the gate and start this project, not just on the 3.5 acres, but on the 50 acres. So let's try to share a vision instead of worrying about a code. I know it's important and all of those things, and we have to meet it or at least address it. So Chris, if you can put up the master plan, that would be very helpful. Well, page number 2. So, ta-da. We went back and listened to you and wanted to come here and start talking about the vision for Dublin Village as a whole, holistically look at it versus just the corner, which a lot of comments that came out of the informal review were, we can't judge this project based on, we don't know what's going on the rest of them. So what we're trying to do here is show you that vision. Keeping in mind, it needs to be flexible to react to market conditions because this, quite frankly, could take 10, 15 years to implement. So the big points on this master plan are, we've implemented 4 public right-of-ways and infrastructures out of the 5 that I believe that are on the concept plan in the code. John Shields being one of them, the north-south connection that goes down to Lowe's, the north-south connection on the east side of our building, the connection over to Village Parkway, and a connection out to eventually Sawmill Road. So 4 or 5, that's pretty good. The McCune Avenue discrepancy that we're having is, we showed it originally, it's on your code, but the fact of the matter is, when we took our plan that showed the 2 buildings to the theater, who have rights relative to parking and how it's oriented, they said, no, we don't want this. We have contiguous parking spaces today. We don't want 2 parking garages. We want 1. There are real reasons why McCune Boulevard isn't shown on our plan. They're legitimate, functional, existing conditions reasons, not just we didn't want to build the road. So I think that's a huge part of a lot of these comments relative to the block size of the building and all that. And I'll get into that in a second. But it's hard to see on this slide because the green's a little faint, but you can see all of the green pieces that are scattered throughout the project. Those are our open spaces. They're public parks, they're pocket parks, they're pedestrian corridors, they're central greens. And if Chris, you could go to the image board, please, which you may not have gotten in your packet because we were a little late in getting it to you, but this is what we want to do at Dublin Village Center, an organic evolution of architecture and open spaces. The image in the middle is what we're trying to create in the two open space centers on the plan, which is vibrant, pedestrian oriented, all the things that we all want to see. And it allows it to evolve over time with different styles of architecture, with the buildings creating the framework and the streets to the master plan. So Chris, if you can go back to the master plan, that'd be great. So the little yellow corner, which is a huge project when you look at it by itself, is just a piece of a puzzle. And this puzzle can unfold like this. We have a theater. We have a requirement to provide them parking, which McCune Boulevard does not allow us to do. We have open space that we're going to commit to resolving on site or as part of our open space plan all across the whole site. We have a project next to the yellow square, which is the apartments that we're calling Phase 1A, which could be, it's called the Farmore Building, but we're looking at doing things there right now. So in context, this is a bigger vision. And Chris, if you can go to the 3D image, which I believe is number 4 and what I handed you earlier. So the computer rendering, you can like it or not like it, but it starts to show you how the apartment project that we're looking at tonight starts to engage the rest of the site. The street network's in place other than McCune. The Farmore Building, which I was telling you about, is behind to the east of our apartment building. We're working on plans for that right now. We'd like to share them with you later. The open spaces that are created, the existing buildings, there's part of them that are saved. There's new buildings that are put in place, all in the spirit of the code that you have for pedestrian activity. So the bigger vision, we're working on it. We're sharing it with you. We'd like to continue to do that. Obviously, it needs to evolve. But I think we've hit 90% of everything that bigger vision wanted to see. McCune is not shown. It's a big divergence from our first plan. There are real reasons for that. So that's the first part of what I want to talk about. The second part of what I want to talk about is the building itself. And Chris, if you go to number 6, please. We love this building. It wasn't in the staff report. You know, it's not discussed, the architecture, all the things that we've been working on. It's a handsome building. Maybe fantastic or beautiful. So if you can get to number 6, I'd like to discuss a few items that I heard in the staff report and the questions that were raised by the panel. So again, black and white computer rendering. The big concept here is when you look at it in 2 dimensions, and it's a yellow blob, so to speak, on the corner of a map, like you're seeing, it doesn't really do it justice. The building's really 2 buildings connected, but hinged by a community center in the middle of it. So, you know, we exceed block length by 13 feet or 72 feet, little details, weeds. The big picture is it's 2 buildings that are connected by a community center and an amenity deck. And that it's sitting on top of a 2-level garage that we need those 2 levels and those number of spaces to make the theater happy with what we're providing them for parking, which they have seen these plans and they've blessed them. So the building, you're saying it's 6 stories all the way around. It's really because, well, first of all, we dropped one level. It was 7, but the front of it on Village Parkway is 2 levels of townhomes, which are in front of the garage, wrapped, and then 3 layers of flats. And then the top level is a loft unit, which is mostly glass and looks out on the river and all those type of things. The sides really are on top, 4 stories on top of 2 parking garage. One of them happened to be in the ground. So to say the building's all 6 stories is not really an accurate representation of it. On the east road that goes north-south, the building's only 3 stories on top of 2, with 1 in the ground. So in essence, it's 4. So we have a building that varies from 4 to 6, one of them being glass and part of a loft space. It's a variety, it's eclectic, it's fun. It's not just a 6-story building. Can you go to number 7, Chris? Please. So in elevation, again, 2 buildings really, north and south piece that's held together with a community center that's all glass. You can basically see through this thing to the amenity deck, straight through to the back, which is the east side of our building, north-south road. It's pedestrian connection. There's some mention of we don't provide a pedestrian connection through the building. There is one. It's public. It goes through. Whether it got missed or whatever, I'm not sure. But again, I want to impress on you the importance of the fact that it's 2 buildings, not just one big one. We heard a lot of things in the informal review about hiding the garage, activating John Shields. We've done those things. The garage is wrapped with residential units except on the east side, where one of those is in the ground. John Shields has retail, commercial, office space, people. It's active. We made a gateway. We heard mention of gateway. You know, this is important intersection, John Shields and Village Parkway. Well, the right side of that building is a gateway in our opinion. It's an architectural statement. It's more like art than architecture. Our architects are here. They can explain the building if you want or have questions. And there's 4 elevations. You can see each one and it's in your packet. Number 8, Chris, if you want to show it real quick. Yeah, so John Shields elevation. Again, the first 2 floors of that are retail, office, and commercial. An active street on John Shields Parkway, which is what we heard you would want us to do. There's 4 stories on top of that. That's all. If you can go to the next one, Chris. Number 10.
Sorry, the PDF just loads kind of slow. If you could please turn on your microphone, please. Sorry.
I apologize. Your microphone turned off. If you could press the button again. Oh, no. Just down at the base of the microphone. Thank you.
Am I on? Okay. Well, you can just cut it off whenever you want, but we think this is beautiful, the corner of this building. We want to talk about those things and how to get this project started, and the brick and the modern and the glass and the gateway structure that we're putting in place. Very active street. And, you know, there's other views. Can you go to 11, please? So this is just another image from Village Parkway. It just shows, it's more that two building version instead of one, where the middle is a very small building that's mostly glass, again, a community center for our residents. I think that's important. You go to number 12 real quick, and again, it's just a 3D version of John Shields. We think the architecture is beautiful. We worked very hard on it. It's traditional, it's Dublin-like, it's got some modern aspects to it. And we will continue to strive to make the architecture very unique and a landmark. We want to make a landmark. So I hate to do it because I want to stay so positive about this project, but there's some points made at the beginning that started out down, we don't want to be here with a disapproval for staff. Okay. We want a positive vibe, but there's 8 points I wrote down in that presentation and the following questions. The corridor building versus podium building. Okay. Then this goes to the like uses, appropriate like uses. It's semantics. We can call this a podium building and get a variance on the height. But we heard you say it was too tall. We took a story off. We have 2 levels of parking garage that we need to adhere to the theater's requirements, and therefore it fit into what is a corridor building definition. Now it's inappropriate use. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think it's a very appropriate use. The massing of the building is too big, which creates the block lengths being too long. Again, it's 2 buildings, not really one. And even if it were graded or judged as one, we're 13 feet off. 13 feet out of 1,000. So again, it's small weed stuff. The 6-story building, it's not a 6-story building. There's parts of it that are, parts of it are 4. There's a variety there. Again, a big point. I heard it repeatedly. We did have 2 buildings. We did have McCune. We had all this. Theater said no. They have rights to the parking lot. We addressed their concerns and tried to do something that made everybody happy. So we can't put the road in. It's really that simple. The road network, that's just McCune. We've done every other road that's in your code. So there are 4 out of 5, I believe, that we have. And the point of we're not allowed to have access on a principal frontage street. We have 4 streets around this project. One of them we're putting in, that north-south public street on the east side of the building. The other 3 are principal frontage streets. So we can't have access to the property from any of the roads except the one we put in. I don't think that's the right way to look at it either. And I believe the code allows us to have principal frontage street access with a traffic study. I also believe it's been granted to other applicants before us. So again, it's semantics. What do you call this road versus this road? The block size, again, it's 13 feet or 72 feet. Okay, I don't know why we're talking about that specifically when we're talking about millions of dollars of investment here, not just for us, but the city and a community we're trying to build. So we're talking about 13 feet. It's not the positive vibe that we want. The open space, that's a big one. Everybody wants to talk about the open space. And all I can tell you is we'll meet it. On site, we'll meet the open space. We'll work with staff, whether there's a bench in it or no bench in it, or this hedge in this one or not in this one. We'll do it. We'll do it. Simple. And we'll probably exceed it once the master plan's put in place. The open space over the whole project will exceed the code because we want it to. Not because we have to, we just want it to. So That's a whole different thing. That's the 8 points I heard. Um, I'm blessed. We're blessed. I feel blessed to be a part of the system. I just want it to be a positive one. And so do we all. We want to run. Got to get out of the gate. And that's what we're asking you to do for us. Support this project, phase 1. With conditions, I suppose, or variances, or whatever it is that Aaron and the engineers and the architects need to do but let's talk about the project, the buildings, the beauty of it. I'm done ranting. You can turn me off.
I don't have that control, but welcome back, Mr. Underhill.
Thank you. I'll wrap it up. You know, you can sense a little, we haven't even heard from you. So, you know, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this project, not only in the last year, but over 13, 14 years now. And so you can sense a little bit of frustration on this side. We hope that, you know, we don't want to set the wrong tone either, but, you know, here's a Bridge Street code. It's pretty hard. That's why I have a job. You know, I think we've done our level best to try to do what we can to bring a special project here. And, you know, sometimes images say more than we can. And I think some of those later images and those renderings will really give you a vibe for what this is going to be. And it's exciting. So we look forward to hearing your feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Underhill. And if I could have you remain, we'll do questions. So I imagine there's going to be at least one. So looking to the commission for questions for the applicant at this time. Mr. Way, I had one carryover from you that we asked for staff on the alignment and if they had access to the Snellfur connection and that sort of thing. So I don't know if you wanted Mr. Underhill to address.
Again, I had I wasn't quite understanding what the right of way was for Village Parkway, depending on how the road gets realigned. And I just wanted to make sure that you all are considering that future condition, and that's what we're like reviewing. And I think it's, you know, the documents are kind of, some of them are different. And so I just wanted to understand that.
Well, obviously we're well aware that we believe that's important to the city. And so we've used the information that's available to us publicly to come up with that, but we'll provide the appropriate right of way. And certainly that can have an implication on where the open space is and whatnot, but certainly a valid point that we will take into consideration. I think we do need to plan for that.
And the second question was on the realignment of John Shields Parkway with Snellfur as the way of looking at the bigger picture. I know we're not approving that, but it informs everything else when you think about that. Did you all have any indication that that was?
Mike, do you hear
Kevin McCauley, Stavroff Land Development, 6689 Dublin Center Drive. We actually provided in early stages as we were designing and looking at this, we provided a couple options through engineering, and it showed how we could navigate that road to meet Snellfur, assuming Germain Honda wasn't in the way. Rather than confuse the board and show them options of how this road could go, we just laid down the straight road. So yes, we had that information. We're aware of that information. We just need to work with the city on the next phase of John Shields and how that's going to go through and where they want us to stub that through. So for the moment, it's just drawn as a straight line on there to not confuse the board even further with options.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you want to keep going?
Let's go Mr. Schneer and then we'll come back. Mr. Schneer.
The parking arrangement with AMC, a lot of this, as it's presented, seems to hinge or is a result of that arrangement. I won't get into the discussion here, but you can tell that a private arrangement, the impact of a private arrangement on a public application is sort of a problem.
Right.
But if you would share a little more of the detail, because at one point there was a statement about the theater wanting contiguous parking, but if John Shields is extended, wouldn't the theater patrons have to cross John Shields to get to AMC?
You're correct. They would have to cross John Shields, but it's not dissimilar from the service road they cross now. What they were saying is we have a contiguous parking lot today. I think it's 300 spaces, 291, whatever that is, 300 spaces. One level that I can walk from the furthest one straight across the parking lot to the theater, across the service road. So when they saw the two garages, where you'd have to go in the garage part, get an elevator, go down, go outside, go through another garage to get over to the theater, it concerned them, and they have rights to say no. So when I said contiguous, what we have provided now is one contiguous surface parking lot. It's just underground. So that addressed their concerns. So all their parking spaces will be provided for on the second level of the garage. So it's another reason, a very important one that I left out, that we have an access point on Village Parkway. The garage is 2 levels, and there's a 10-foot grade across the site, okay? So on the east side of the building, you enter the garage, and all of that level is public parking, mostly for the theater. But other people can use it, shared parking. The first level, which is for the residents, is accessed from Village Parkway. So there's 2 levels of garage, public, private. And again, that's why we need another access point. But the theater was very hesitant about having 2 parking garages.
Okay.
So we made it 1.
Again, it's an awkward position because it's a private matter that we're sort of forced to get involved in, or I feel we are. So that your arrangement with AMC says that parking needs to be contiguous. And currently they cross a service road to get there.
Yes.
And in your plan, they would cross John Shields, which per your agreement with them is okay.
It was okay. They've seen the plan, they've blessed the plan.
Yeah. But what is not okay is that if the parking that's dedicated to them is not on the same level as the street.
I really do know it. I've been working with 3
There
years.
you go.
I'm Matt Stavroff Company, 6689 Dublin Center Drive. And I've worked with 3 different lineups at AMC to work through this issue. It was late 2019. They agreed to something that wasn't even close to what they're asking today. And that's before the pandemic, when their business was electric. And then the pandemic hit and we went silent. Both sides did, for obvious reasons, for about a year. And I got a whole new group of people to work with. Got a little bit somewhere with them. Then they moved people around. I got a whole new group of people. And it's not my favorite group. And I love AMC. They've been great to us through the years. And I really have had a wonderful relationship with them. But to keep it simple, they have the rights to 450 spaces. They have 2 lots that they have restrictions on. One is that the subject lot, the apartments are, it's not the whole lot. It's the southern half of that lot. And they have today, they think they have more spaces, but they only have 300. But they have the right to 450 between that lot and then the little theater lot that is to the southeast, and it has 51 spaces. We know it like the back of our hand. I've tried everything with them. I've tried to wrap behind the building where our office is to expand that 51 parking spaces to 150. Kevin McCauley has drawn a ring around it to show them 500 feet, a radius to how far it is. We've offered to pay for valet. We've done it all. And the guy I'm dealing with just isn't super, super malleable. And I think that they're going through a lot of stress in their business. And this is the last thing they really want to deal with. But yes, Lance, they'll cross the road. They're happy with one contiguous parking lot. I think it's a mistake by them. I now have to restrict the eastern lot. So they've never had a restriction on the eastern courtyard there. I've got to restrict that whole lot to do this project. And I don't think if we do not get this done soon, I do not think it's going to get done. I do not think that lot will ever be developed until they leave or they go out of business. I'm very confident of that. I say that unequivocally. I promise you, I believe it. This is 99 after tonight. I mean, if you're not interested, I understand, but this has been a lot of hard work, a lot of hard work. We're struggling with a temporary plan right now. They haven't really fully approved everything. The permanent plan, yes. The temporary plan, they're like, what are you going to do when we're under construction? And it's common sense. You only have so much real estate adjacent to them. We're going to have signs and police it. Maybe we'll have wayfaring signs and maybe even valet. But it's hard to get over that. And I don't even know what we're going to be approved to build. So timing is very, very important. But that's what we're dealing with here.
And so the one final question on that, but for that agreement, you would have a different plan. If there was not a parking agreement with AMC,
I think we would do some things. We would do some things different.
Okay.
No doubt.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chenier.
Can I follow on?
Mr.
I'm just trying to understand this whole parking thing. So you said they only have rights to the southern part of that lot. Is that correct? But you need to give them the whole footprint of that lot to satisfy their parking.
Well, what they've done is they've for the first time have added parking spaces, and it's not that they need 450. It's that they have the legal right to it now. Right now, they have 350 restricted. I've explained it to them blue in the face. They're enjoying the power they have over this particular group I'm dealing with. So they're making me give 450. There's only 51. I said, I'll expand the southeast lot by 100 so that I have to give you less in the north parking garage. They said no. So they want the whole second floor or the ground level as it's accessed from the east side.
And so the first level of the parking garage or parking structure is below grade? Is that correct?
I believe it is, yes.
And they've said, no, we don't want to go below grade?
Right. Because in order, I think, to get to that part, you would have to travel and then go down or access it off of Village Parkway because the site goes like this from east to west. So they want to access it as close as they can to their front door.
Right.
And we do have a...
But in theory, you could assign the bottom level to them, and then on the second level parking, you could split it and have it under the footprints of the buildings. And so you have a route through the development, whether it's a road or it's a pedestrian way or...
And if I could interject and steer us back to conversation, private agreements aren't subject to the Planning and Zoning Commission's purview, but understanding what agreements have dictated in the plan. So right now they're proposing 2 parking level garages. What the use is, we're concerned with what's available publicly, privately for the residential use and how it meets code, but shared parking agreements previously, entered into private agreements are not within our purview, so to speak. And Mr. Boggs, I'll ask you if you want to provide any additional clarification or if we're good to continue on.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Call. Yeah, you're right that the private agreements between, any 2 parties, these parties or any others aren't necessarily within the purview of the commission, but as far as providing context to what they are proposing, that is, I think, the appropriate lens to be looking through here, rather than trying to reconfigure the agreement that they have, if that makes any sense.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Boggs.
I would liken it to the power line easement, right? We're not going to move that power line easement, right? It's just a different type of agreement that's a quasi-public utility, I guess you would call it. But it's the same situation. Our hands are tied for a long period of time by the agreement, just as it is with that easement.
Thank you, Mr. Underhill.
I was just trying to find a way to create that route and break up the mass and solve everything, but
Mr. Chinook.
I have a couple questions about the access off of Village Parkway. So is this the correct understanding is that the residents access the garage only from Village Parkway and the public accesses it, or again, I don't want to bring up AMC again, but access from the street behind, the proposed street behind. Is that correct?
The red arrow that you see that accesses Village Parkway, that goes north and south, is an entry into the residential part of the garage,
Okay.
which is the first level on the ground.
Right.
You can, so primarily they will use that, but they'll also be able to, there's a speed ramp kind of thing inside the garage. So if somebody wanted to go from the top to the bottom, they could, and vice versa. It wouldn't be the first place they'd go. All the theater people with wayfinding, as Matt had mentioned, and signage, will use the north-south road that's there in green. Where those two green arrows go into the garage, we provided 2 access points into a solid level of parking, I think 280 spaces or something like that. So the theater gets all of those and the additional surface lots that Matt was speaking to.
Okay, so then is that, you call it an auto plaza where the pavers are out front there? Is there parking there as well? Will people be parking in that courtyard in front off of Village Parkway?
He's asking if there's going to be parking in that courtyard where we intended it to be a drop-off area, almost like a
No,
luxury.
no parking in there. It's like, envision driving up to a really fantastic resort and it's glass in front of you and lights and the building's nice at night and you drive through it. It's more of an auto court.
Okay.
Maybe there's a fountain or art, something like that. No parking spaces.
Okay, so
Just to get to the garage.
there'll be drop off traffic. There'll be drop off traffic there as well as garage traffic in that area. Okay. And then the other question I had regarding that center area, I believe you mentioned it would be public access to the courtyard inside the complex. Is that, and you said a community center, you mentioned that I guess the link between what you're calling the two buildings, that center link. Can you talk a little bit more about that use and is it open for the public or is it for the
When you
residents?
get to shows the courtyard. If you understood me to say all of the public, then that's a misconception. It's our residents will have it, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's 40,000 square feet. It's 0.8 acres of a green space for our 300 residents. That's important. It doesn't count towards the open space requirement and all of those things, but we believe we are providing ample open space for our 300 residents on the building, in the building. So it's not open to the public. That would be a maintenance nightmare, quite honestly.
It's okay.
Who's coming, who's going? It's not big enough for 8,000 people. It's big enough for 300. So.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And just making sure I understood the same thing. There is no pedestrian throughway through the center of the building.
There is.
Okay.
You can get through the building through the garage. But you have to understand there's 2 levels of garage. That amenity deck that you just saw, it's on the top of the garage. So when you walk through the building, you're doing it on the first floor of the garage and out the back.
Understood. But there is, again, clarifying question.
Yes, you can walk through. It's on the plan.
The community center.
Mid-building pedestrian way, Kevin has clarified.
So just a clarification, the community center, as you call it, the mostly glass, is there pedestrian access through the glass center area?
Through the garage.
Only through the garage?
You'll go through the lobby of the community center and then through the building. I know it's confusing. I've confused everybody over here too.
Confuse yourself.
Yeah, I confused myself. I mean, Dan, if you wouldn't mind speaking to the architect who designed it, can explain to you exactly how it goes through there.
Sure.
Hello, if you could.
He's, Director of Design with MA Design, 2251 Starleaf Lane. So what Michael's explaining is we've actually, if you look on the plan on the right side where we've kind of got a hatch pattern. So the pedestrians will walk up under a covered porch into that core area. and there will be an exterior stair that will deliver them to the second floor of the garage. And then we'll have access from the elevator to the second floor at that point. And then we've got a designated path that we're working on or developing through the garage. And then it will come out the east side underneath that monumental stair. So we're looking at things like nicer lighting, paving, just cues so that the traffic slows down and understands there's a pedestrian way through that garage.
Understood.
For the public.
Other questions? Mr. Way?
Can you tell me the floor to floor of the loft units on the on the Village Parkway frontage? Or I know that's getting very detailed, but.
So on the 6th floor, it's a tall floor. So you'd enter the lot on the that 6th floor, the finished floor. So it's just a higher volume, and that's what's expressed in elevation.
Would it be more than 14 feet?
The tallest floor is about 18 feet tall.
Is code,
it's
the code limit is 14 feet for.
Right, we realize that.
So that would be, so it actually puts it to a 7-story building on that frontage. I'm just stating that so everybody understands that that's not meeting the code right now.
It's what happens when you get creative. So, you want to have a great space and have all glass and tall ceilings and this really cool loft that really we don't think is provided in Dublin. Nobody builds new lofts that, you make them in old buildings. We want to try to build a new one. So we're 4 feet off from making the code. We'd hope we could work with you to get that to be a variance.
That's a different condition than obviously another story of more units, right? So it's but it's more of a creative element than a practical one in terms of getting us more rentable space.
I'm just trying to state the facts. I'm not making judgment at this point.
Other questions? Mr. Fishman?
Thank you. Sorry. I'll stay with the parking right now. Easy calculation, there's 193 two-bed. I assume the building shares the parking with the theater, correct?
I didn't hear what
I can't hear what
Could you
you're
take
saying.
your mask off?
No, I can't. I don't want to give him a cold.
Here while you ask the questions and put.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, sure. Now, so in the building, you've got, in the 2 bedrooms with 2 people per, in the 1 bedrooms, you could have, this is conservative, 386 people. And of course, in the 3 bedroom, being conservative and having 2 people, you're going to have 686 people, okay, in that building, okay, occupants. And it could be less, it could be more, but I mean, that's just easy numbers. Okay, now, so you got 686 people, which with the type of people we have in Bridge Street right now, most of those people will have a car. They're young, on-the-go people that want to eat and shop and all that stuff. Okay, so that's a lot of cars. Okay, that's 686 cars if everybody has a car, but they're not. So let's turn it down to 500 cars. Okay, now they're going to be sharing that with the theater. When the theater starts rocking and popping, they're going to be using those spaces. That's the only place they have to park other than the 150 they've got on the other side. Okay, now, and you said this is an agreement, what do you call it, in-house agreement. In-house agreements expire. Am I correct?
Are you talking about AMC?
Yeah.
It's called a reciprocal easement agreement.
It's an easement then. Is it filed
runs,
with the state of Ohio?
Runs in perpetuity.
Okay, good. That's good.
But it can cease certain conditions within that agreement. And
that's why
this parking one can go, I want to be clear, it can go away when they stop being a movie theater. And then whatever they replace it with, they have car parking ratios that are stated in this agreement, and you have to meet them in these adjacent lots. So it's the reason places like Tuttle Mall don't get redeveloped. They have 4 or 5 different owners, and they have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 it's a nightmare. That's why it sits.
And we don't want this to be a nightmare.
And you can read an article on that in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about a White Plains Mall. It's very interesting. It's worth reading, by the way.
Anyway, not to dwell on this. Okay. That was just a small part of my concern. The other part is that my experience with parking garages is that people who go to theaters they go to it. If the theater's rocking, okay, and they're filling the shows, they go to the theater and they're gonna have dinner afterwards, okay, and they're having it somewhere, okay, they have to get out of that garage. Well, the theater's all let out at the same time. And if you've been to a Blue Jackets game, an Ohio State game, it sometimes takes you an hour to get out of the garage, okay? And one of the big, and I've been to theaters in Chicago and New York where it's a nightmare, okay? Even if you're on the first floor, if you're not the first guy to your car, you're standing in line in a carbon monoxide filled garage in your car waiting to get out, okay? So personally, and I can't speak for everybody, I hate parking garages for things like theaters and ball games and so on to be able to get out. And I think a lot of people do once they do it once. So I think that's a deterrent. That's just one of my questions. But anyway, I think that's something I'd like to hear your comment about people desiring to be in a parking garage when they're running in to go to the movies and they want to get out of there and they've got to wait in the parking garage to get out. Even though you're on one floor, if you're not the first guy out, you're in line to get out because there's only 2 entrances, right?
Did you want a response?
Yeah, I do.
I would just say those are good observations. Honestly, those are good observations, but we've looked at them and we've had the movie theater expert look at it. Michael Feight's done a zillion apartments.
No, they're not apartments.
He's run those ratios. We know what we're dealing with and the experts feel comfortable. I was just saying that's an interesting observation. I mean, I don't disagree or agree because I've had some of those issues.
Yeah. We also have a parking garage consultant on the team that looks at every possible thing that could happen to cause a backup.
Well,
So
I'm not trying
all
to
those things are getting worked, they're details that get worked out.
I understand, Michael. I'm not trying to be hard to live with, but I know that if I go to a theater and most people who've been in a parking garage in a theater don't want to be there again, okay, because it's hard to get out, okay?
I don't like them either, but I also could be in one of those Progressive insurance commercials. You don't act like your parents or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, I just wanted to tie up the parking thing. That's, I think, another thing to think about is that it's not going to be as desirable as
We also don't want to
surface
lose sight of, this is the first of what probably will be other parking garages and other opportunities to park. So we're trying to solve all the problems in this one garage and everybody's need in this one garage when there's other surface lots and other potential parking garages down the future.
But there's not going to be enough surface parking.
Well, they can park.
There is today, but you've made good points. These are things we're going to have to address as this
Okay,
project.
I just wanted to tie it up. Yeah, okay.
And that's fair.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Seems like
Mr.
parking is
Way.
a very popular, there's a drawing in our packet that shows parking underneath the building, 229 spaces, and then it has parking spread around. I don't, what was this drawing that says parking counts trying to communicate to us? Is it,
You put
are you
that
saying
up
it's
on the
different?
screen, Will, so we can see that?
Are you saying that you've learned more since then and they want 450 on one? Is that what I'm just,
They're going to take
Are you referring to this? Sorry, or different? Yep.
that's the one.
maybe just parking counts. We're just telling you how many are on that level.
I think the 229 is the existing spaces, correct?
That's not an accurate count of the parking spaces. I don't think.
And for clarification, I don't believe that's the entire lot. I believe that's under the footprint of the building. It would remove 229 spots.
Exactly.
So what was the purpose of this drawing and including it in our packet so I understand?
I don't have an answer for that.
Well,
Kevin wanted to put it in. Yeah.
Some of it was, there was a question from staff that requested where other parking fields are or parking lots are. And what we're trying to show, as you can see in other areas, there's the 51, there's the 131, it's showing just different. And this is not for just AMC parking. This is simply for when they say you took 483 parking spaces out of play because that's what's in the entire north lot there. What are you going to do when you have 300,000 square feet of retail. We're trying to demonstrate that we have plenty of ample parking throughout the center, and that's just what this is showing. It's showing that we take out 400 and some parking spaces, we replace it with a parking garage, but then we still have an abundance of other parking throughout the center. It has nothing to do with these are just AMC lots or these are not AMC lots. This is for, there's, like I said, 300,000 square feet of retail here, not just AMC.
And for clarification, it does call out 721 spaces, and so it doesn't
Yeah.
correlate directly to the AMC theater regardless.
It's just showing parking for the center.
So to Mr. Fishman's point, I think there's a standard that the movie theater wants us to adhere to, but we all know, practically speaking, there's likely to be a lot of surface parking available at other times, and someone may say, that's better for me. I'm going to walk the extra 100 feet and park outside. So there'll be ample parking opportunities elsewhere as well that are unrestricted.
Thank you. Mr. Wayne. Okay. Ms. Harder.
I just had a couple of questions. Have you connected with the neighbors and some of your businesses and so forth and having conversation with them? Because, you know, this is an ongoing project for the neighbors around the area.
Kathy, are you talking about the
There are-
neighbors in the Dublin Village?
No, well, you could have apartment people who already have moved in there, but I'm thinking of homeowners around the area. There's the civic association that's around the area. Just connecting because this is an ongoing project and that just kind of builds the opportunity of bringing people together.
I think that's a good idea. To be honest, all of our neighbors I know, but I don't go very far. I don't go over to Greystone Muse as an example. I'm thinking Matt Callahan at Pulte, who I talked to. I'm thinking about Brent Sobchak at Casta, who I talked to. The hotel, one of the hotel owners we converse with a little bit. And then, of course, we love our tenants. We constantly are engaged with them, very much so.
Do you see some of your tenants moving into some of the opportunities on the lower end of the business section?
I think most of them today are happy where they are, or maybe the economic model that we have for them works today. That may or may not work for them, but we have a couple in mind that are existing that could potentially, yes.
And I do see all the work that you've done and so forth. And I do appreciate our conversation last time where we were talking a bit about like, could this be condos with that mixed use? Did that just slip away off the table when you were kind of growing this
Talking
project?
about condos on our site.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that that I'm comfortable with that model. And I'm very comfortable with the model we've presented, but I can.
Sorry to interrupt. If I'm,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, if I might, in terms of the zoning and land use context, talking about multifamily, that is sort of the umbrella that the commission is dealing with, whether the property owner ultimately chooses to have those legal arrangements be apartment or condo is in their court more so than the commission's, to be clear.
I would give as an example. Thank you. I would give as an example of a failure of that concept at Creekside in Gahanna. And that's what we're trying to, I don't know if any of you have been there, but those things have not, it's not been a good situation with that mix of uses there. So the multifamily seems to support the retail much better in particular. The multifamily in a rental sense.
In the rental sense. And then safety too, when you're having people cross over, I think I need a little bit more in that area about, families crossing and kids and going to movies and different times of the day with lighting. And also, I know when I've left the movie theater, I come out a different door than I came in the front because it's easier, and you can, because it's easier to get to your car, and those kind of opportunities too. Thank you.
Any final questions? Mr. Way.
Sorry, I just want to ask the question, we didn't really get to it, of why did you move away from putting the townhouses on Village Parkway, right? That you had in the preliminary, is it because of, well, just why did you do that?
They're still there. They're just now attached to the garage.
They're now attached, right?
They were detached and before, and when the garage went from 2 to 1, the efficiency of it became
Yeah.
important for us to attach them.
I really appreciated in your preliminary review that touch because I like as the transition to the across Village Parkway. So I know that you've now tucked them underneath basically, but they're still
Nuances
part of
to it, they're tucked underneath, but yet above them, the buildings step back 10 feet. So they're gonna be prominent. We really want them to be prominent and we're working towards that. So although they're not detached from the building, they will be prominent and very special on the ground 2 floors.
Thank you.
Final questions for the applicant. Ms. Harder.
I know we're not getting into a lot of details, but just with my visual sense, and it kind of puts it together in my head in other areas. So here we go. When I look at a patio, when you're building, when you have the patio, am I going to be able to put like a table and 2 chairs, or is it something I'm just going to stand on? I'm just trying to get the visual feel. If I'm living there and there's a patio, can I walk out and put something on it?
Are you referring just to the townhomes?
Yeah, to the apartments, because it looks like you can walk out to
A
something.
lot of the apartments have balconies and they're probably.
In the balconies, I meant to say, sorry.
We try to design the build. This is a personal thing and I think shared by the teammates. One of the things I don't like to see on apartment buildings is balconies that are stuck out that extend beyond the building facade. So a detail that you can see there is we've tucked all the balconies kind of back into the building so they don't stick out.
So would you be able to put just simply a chair and 2
No, you have plenty of room.
2 chairs and a table?
Yes, it's
Okay,
outdoor space.
I
10
appreciate
to
that.
12
That helps
foot
me
wide.
to
Yeah.
think of the whole project. Thank you.
All right, final questions for the applicant. Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen. At this time, we'll enter into deliberations. So, Mr. Chinook, you want to start us off? I'm your favorite person.
Thanks. I think the challenge we all have is obviously we all are very anxious for something to happen to this area, this site. I think it's the right idea, and I don't mind the architecture. Actually, I think the architecture is really nice. I kind of get the connection. I think you've done a lot there to show the articulation, which is also really nice. I personally just can't get over the scale of the building, and I understand the reasoning to go to 1 building as opposed to 2, but I just think in that area, I'm just struggling with the whole, honestly, the scale of it, and I think you're going to hear a lot too about the green space. And I appreciate the fact that the master plan will exceed the green space, but it's hard for us when we're approving in a bubble, if you will, to not consider green space on this particular site, with the promises of potentially having green space elsewhere. And again, I appreciate the attempt on the streetscape and some of those amenities, but when we talk about usable green space, I'm not sure that really fits that mold there. But again, I think the architecture is nice and the overall look of the building is nice. I'm just struggling with the scale and size of the building.
Thank you, Mr. Chinook. Mr. Stier.
Mr. Schneer?
Let's see. Let's talk about the positive. I think you've listened to us and done a great job in the modifications, seeing the retail there. The amount of green space is an improvement. I'm going to go down the rabbit hole, the parking, because you've told us that has informed the way this has been developed. And as Thad pointed out, this is a case where, as I said before, we don't want to be involved in it, but we are involved in it. And, Mr. Hill, respectfully, I don't relate, public utility to a private agreement. Public utility has right of eminent domain. It's a very different animal. So the fact that when you come into a property and there's utility easements that you have to live with, that have to be lived with, that is, in my opinion, something that the commission should take into account. It's a different matter when you come into a situation and there's a private agreement with respect to parking or any other matter that now influences what we're asked to approve. So if you, I asked the direct question, if you take out that parking agreement, this would appear to become a different development. And I believe it becomes a different development that is more appropriate for the location, the scale, et cetera. I think it's a beautiful building. I think, I don't want to steal the chairperson's thunder, but I don't think that walking through a very attractive passageway, up steps and over a parking garage really is what we think about when we think about, a pedestrian path. So it's a very attractive or a very attractive one building, but it is one building. And I think that's the part that gives me personally discomfort. And to the extent that that passageway, the two buildings, the elimination of the cross street is all tied up in this parking agreement, that's unfortunate. But that seems to be somewhat the case. So let's not get hung up on the code. I mean, as a semantic exercise, we could throw out the code. And I don't want to be hidebound by the code, and we've shown flexibility, but even if we were to do so, I think it's hard pressed to say that's the right building on that location, at that size, and that scale. So that's, it all distills down to, I like everything. If those buildings were separated, I'm not bothered by the height. I like the design. I think having commercial, is awesome, but somehow some separation. And if that's not possible because of exogenous factors, I'm sorry about that, but that's sort of the way I come down.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Fishman.
Chairman Cole, excuse me for interrupting. We have a member of the public here who would like to offer comments.
Thank you for the interruption. And I did neglect, and I apologize. I did neglect to ask anyone from the public if they would like to make comment and make sure that we did not receive any during the duration of the meeting.
And then I would just note that after public comment is received, then Mr. Chinnock and Mr. Schneer, I would suggest should have an opportunity to speak to that as well.
Yes. Hello and welcome. If you wouldn't mind, please stating your name and address for the record.
Yes, good evening. My name is Scott Herring. I live at 3280 Lily Mar Court, which is accessed from the Martin Road corridor, a little to the south of this development. I am a member of the East Dublin Civic Association, but tonight my comments are my own. I just like to make that clear. So I saw this on the agenda, this meeting tonight, and I read the one paragraph here that began redevelopment of 229 space parking lot. And over the past 20 years that I've lived in Dublin, there's been cases before P&Z regarding the shopping center. And one contentious case years ago, there was great talk about the covenant of the center and all these rules and standards that had to be upheld. So I apologize, I arrived at 6:38 and missed the opening remarks. But here's my question. So if in the entire shopping center, for some reason, these parking spaces were mandated, 229 for the shopping center. So there was a chart up here about the housing, 301 housing units for which 450 parking spaces would be provided. And I just thought at face value that meant for the residents. And it sounds like tonight there's a commingling of parking. I guess I envision that a residential structure like this might have a gate or a pass card, and it sounds like there's a public element to this. So my question is simple. I guess I thought that it would be 450 parking spaces that are required for these new residents. And the 229 that are required or were required for the shopping center would need to be added to that. So just sounds like we're several hundred parking spaces short. Although and certainly the whole other discussion of agreements and rights of another tenant on a parcel. So that was that. I do give you folks hope that the block distance should be no issue whatsoever. Precedent was set in the first year of the Bridge Street development. I attended a city council meeting. I believe that was Planner Ray approached the city council and said, even with a blank slate, we cannot uphold the block requirements. And I believe one of the key parcels is the triangle that's now the AC Hotel. Oh, we can't put a cross street because it would violate some. As I recall, there was 7 immediates. And I commented on that and said, holy smokes, even the city can't meet the city codes. So maybe the codes are too tight. And if there's ever been a waiver, when I hear things like, yes, 12 feet, 17 feet, or 70, 100. The key point that I heard, and I do appreciate this, is for 10 years, the city has talked about the Bridge Street corridor, urban density, walkable downtown. This doesn't speak to me. I'm a ranch house, single family, R1 person. But if you want density, this looks like a great way to go. To me, didn't seem like a big deal if a little cross street. There is a sketch from 10 years ago, this grid network, all these possible streets. Gosh, one little street. If someone's walking in the center, leaving the Big Sandy and wants to go, it sounds like they could diverge 250 feet to the south or the north and not walk through the glass atrium. But if they want to walk through it, cut through it. So I don't know. The rest of this sounded good to me, but I was just puzzled about the parking because that was my initial question. What abracadabra, what happened to that? But yeah, lots of precedent's been set. A little nervous when I hear about, let's not get hung up on the code and the rules, because that's all I've got as a citizen, is to hope that the rules are being upheld, especially on big things. So I'm glad to see that the height is within the prescribed height. Mass, architecture, I don't care. Finishes, I don't care. That's your deal. But that's just my observation. Wanted to share that about the parking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming tonight. And I, again, apologize for jumping the public comment. Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record.
Will, sure, call. I'm Randy Roth. I live at 6987 Grandy Cliffs Drive, and I'm Vice President of the East Dublin Civic Association. And our president asked me to speak on behalf of our association this evening. And for those of you who don't know our organization, we're an umbrella organization of neighborhood associations. So we really try to represent everybody from the river over to Sawmill and from Martin Road up to the county line, which is why we've always taken an active interest in this area, the Bridge Street development. We were active in the whole planning process for that. And I don't want to shock my friend Matt Stavros by saying, I think it's a little premature. I know we've been waiting so long. But bear with me. I've got an argument I want to make on this. One of the things that we really had looked at years ago in the community plan process, 1995 to 97, my friend Rick Gerber and I were co-chairs of the Transportation Task Force, which existed for those 2 years as a subsidiary committee to the Community Plan Steering Committee, of which Warren and I were members. And we found that our engineering department, Columbus Engineering Department, our independent traffic consultant, Doyle Clear, the mathematical modelers on the committee, such as myself, our entire committee plus the council and P&Z, we said we need to make the Snowfer extend it west and make it fully operational. And I have to say, although I tend to be pessimistic about what traffic improvements can do, I think that traffic improvement, if we could get it done, would really dramatically improve what we can have in this area. And think about it when we pair this with building that bridge from Emerald Parkway and extending it down south. That's going to be the major corridor where I think we could have a building like this, where I think retail could be viable. Our civic association is skeptical about retail being able to go at this level and succeed along John Shields Parkway compared to what it could do in a building this size. And again, we don't mean to second guess you or Matt Stavros or the developers. We know that when you're building a heavily multifamily area, having retail on the bottom, successful retail, is really crucial to the longevity and success and safety of that neighborhood. So we are for this kind of concept, but it really seems that you have to have those roads built and imagine what that's going to make possible. It just seems to me, and again, another thing about the planning process is we had hoped that the way that the applications would come in is we would go with the Bridge Street District from Riverside Drive and then build back, and that we go from Sawmill and build forward. We know we don't control, our big problem here for Matt is that we don't control the frontage on Sawmill, but we're creating new frontage with this new road. And it seems to me a building of this scale is compatible there, but it strikes us as very incompatible to what's across the street in Teller Flats, incompatible with Sycamore Ridge and those other things. It seems we'd like to see it scaled up. And we think the retail could work best along that major artery that we're going to be building north-south. It's just where we think the planning should really go. So we'd like to ask Matt to think about it. I know Matt and we have made common cause numerous times trying to get that intersection built, right? We're old buddies and we failed. Okay, we've failed. But I think what I want to say is that, you know, I think these things, I've got my fingers crossed that they're going to happen. And I think they will allow us to reimagine this, particularly because we've got the community plan revision coming up in January again. And I think our association would like to really push for something like that. If we could, and I think that would be far enough from Riverside Drive that the retail could go. I think in between is betwixt and between, and we're just not confident in that. Finally, what I want to talk about is security. You may be well aware of what's going on the other side of the street. What's happened recently at the New Anderson's development, that's brand new, and it's not Dublin standards, but it's nice. And they are really getting hit by crime in a serious way. And what I'm suggesting here is that I hope that as we build this out, that part of our planning process involves security. And what I mean is when you're building big buildings like this with concealed corridors, I'm a criminologist, by the way, so bear me out on this. That can be a dangerous situation if you don't have a security plan. And so, and another thing that I think is vital, you know, we're talking about our green space, but when we look at what's happened with that green space that came in with Sycamore Ridge, which is one of the developments that we supported as an association, it's just a dead grass space. I would love to see you recommend to council to see if we can buy some additional land from Matt to build really active parks there where people are out there during daylight hours and, you know, mingling, walking dogs, whatever. Make it active because that's going to make it safer. You know, if we have these isolated little blocks here that's just grass, that's not going to make the community safer. It's not going to build neighborhood. It's not going to cohere. So I think, you know, I'm thinking, you know, New York City works with Central Park. What are we thinking here when we're thinking about making an active place? Is visionary here. I just don't see visionary here the way I see in Dublin. And that's a problem for me. I really would like to see us be aggressive and work closely with Matt and the other developers to get really nice, active park space there, because we don't have it there. And finally, I'm just concerned about aging of these buildings. You know, we love Sycamore Ridge, but I went through there campaigning for a certain someone for city council just recently who won. I know Kathy and I are part of that cabal. But I'm campaigning for Amy. I went through and I hit every one of those residences. And what struck me is how well the interior ones, they're kind of, they're almost like attached condos, although they're rental units, how well they have aged, how much life there is on those streets, the quality of the holiday decorations. But when you go to those barrack style, where you've got the 12 units and you've got the 3 stairways, those are really aging. You don't see activity. You don't see that. And those stairwells, the paint's peeling, there's dirt everywhere. These things age. And so I want to make sure when we think about these kinds of places that they're going to age. And so I know we're going to have tough standards there, but we had tough standards with Sycamore Ridge, right? And when you build those big barracks buildings, they age faster than when you have something on the scale of a Taller Flats, et cetera, Greystone Mews. So that's just an editorial comment. Warren and I have lived here a long time. So I don't know if I have any wisdom. I'm just old, but these are the things I'd like to see, something a little different. And this building like this could be appropriate to me if it's on that brand new corridor. It makes more sense there. And so I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying, why not think about moving it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any others here for public comment? Welcome. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Diane Cardilano. I live at 3390 Martin Road. So thank you. I hadn't intended to speak, but I would kind of like to echo Mr. Herring's concern about Mr. Schneer's comment about not paying attention to code, and would just appreciate some clarification and reassurance that you didn't, mean what it sounded like. So anyway, that, especially since we have a case, it's going to directly affect where we live too. So so that was all, just concerned me a little bit. So.
And I can speak, Planning and Zoning Commission, our role is the code. And so I'll let Mr. Schneer clarify his comments.
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't mean exactly what he said, but anyway, would appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for coming.
Well, you shook them up.
Mr. Schneer.
Well, I did mean what I said, but only in the full context. I said as a Socratic exercise, if we threw out the code, how would we deal with this? So that I wasn't suggesting we do, but the point was that the applicant was saying, let's not be hidebound by the code. And I was suggesting, even if we weren't hidebound by the code, this project doesn't work the way it's designed. So I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication with respect to that.
Thank you. And then due diligence, Mr. Chinnock, do you wish to make any?
No, again, I just echo the appreciation of the public comment.
Okay. Mr. Schneer.
No, but it did remind me of one thing. For the record, I have no problem with the parking level, the amount of parking.
Mr. Fishman.
Okay. Randy, thanks for coming. I haven't seen you in so long. You look good. Anyway, I'm not going to be as eloquent as Mr. Schneer. I just think there's too much on too small a parcel. The building is giant, whether it's 2 buildings or 1 building. When we developed the code, and you guys have worked really hard with this, and I really appreciate it. We also worked very hard developing the code. It was 2 years and many times 2 meetings a week. We had consultants, lots of consultants, as the city likes to use consultants. And those consultants told us that we didn't want to make anything too big. Even though we allowed a code for flexibility, we don't want to be at maximum codes. And that seems to be something that developers do. They see the code at 6 stories or 7 stories, then they say, we're going to build to 7 stories. And the consultant explained to us that wasn't going to happen, but I knew it was, okay? but I think that this building is a beautiful building. Now, Randy made a good point about aging, and I assume this is top floors are stick built. Is it full brick or slim brick?
And concept plan where we're still, crayons.
But that's something to think about. And I think the aging is important. What are these buildings to look like 20, 30 years from now? But I also think that we spent about half an hour talking about parking. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's going to be, with a building this big on this small piece of property, with the way that the roads are running and maybe the future intersection and maybe no road going the other direction, I think we've got lots of problems. I think the building is out of character. I think this building would look spectacular on 3 times as much property with beautiful green around it. And Randy made a good point about usable property. Our mayor talks about that all the time, that we want property where people will gather, with open space where people gather. And when the consultants advised us on the code, they talked a lot about pocket parks and lots of green space. And they said, you don't want this to look like Chicago, and you don't want to have crime problems with people coming through tunnels. I remember, Randy, since you mentioned tunnels, crime, the consultants talked about that. And they said, when you have open space with lots of people standing around, you don't have the crime. And so I just think that, I think staff did a good job too. And I think you both did a good job. And I think that staff, I like to go with staff's recommendation. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to make this something that's going to be an asset, not just a people packer, but a place that people can enjoy. And I think there's too many people for the space. This is the most giant building in there as far as a residential building. And I think if we come up with something that fits the space better as green space. I remember one of the consultants said, you want green space that ebbs and flows. I don't know exactly what that means, but he said that you have it throughout the property, not just little pieces around. And you don't have room for green space throughout the property. I assume that the clubhouse is private property, right? You're not going to have, I can't walk up there and, right, if I'm not a resident of the property.
He clarified that earlier.
What?
Private amenity.
Yeah, it's a private amenity. So it can't count as open space. So anyway, not to go on and on, but I think that you guys made a great effort. I think but I think that it's not the right proposal for this Bridge Park, this part of Bridge Park. It's not enough space.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. And for clarification, the crayons, for those of you who haven't been in attendance at our multi-stage, we use an analogy, I use an analogy, that concept plan is crayons on paper. We're really trying to understand what it could look like. And then when we get to a preliminary development plan, we're building with Lego blocks, the Duplo, the larger blocks, just trying to get massing, trying to understand what it could look like. And then when we get to the final development, we're down to the details. We're down to those little Lego blocks and making sure that everything looks right, open space, everything like that. Just wanted to clarify for those of you who wondered why I was mentioning crayons. Ms. Harder.
Thank you for your ongoing development and being a part of this community and moving this forward. We all know that something needs to happen, but it's got to be the right thing. And tonight, I think that we discovered a lot of questions that still need to be answered, which is perfectly fine when we're in the crayon stage and so forth. But there are things that are still to think about. I think about Sawmill Road is very different than Riverside and how we're moving this all forward. And again, like tonight it was brought up about the safety. We talked about moving people from one place to another, safety. We talked about, I would like to, my thoughts too were about moving people like to where they got to get to work and the timing parking and that they can get out of their property pretty easy that way too. I guess, when you mentioned the word luxury apartments, I want to get that feel of that. And I think your plan does do that. I want to see it at 6. It sounds like there's a little opportunity that it is 7. So if it's lowering that first one, really talk about, yes, you can't see the river if we lower it or something. So those kind of concepts, I agree with many of the things that were said around with my other colleagues as well too. But again, I very much appreciate all the time and effort, and I appreciate the time and effort with the city as well too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. Mr. Way.
Thank you. So I really appreciate listening to us in terms of thinking big picture about the future of the center. And the drawing that you provided, well, it's pretty crude. I think it really does give you a sense of working within the street grid and then starting to place buildings within that. And I think inherently in this document, you placed small buildings, fronting streets, broken up, ways to get through them. And I think that's the type of impact that we need to have on this site. When you look at this plan north of John Shields, you obviously chose to keep Big Sandy and other big box stuff there, probably from a phasing standpoint. But at some point, those are going to redevelop. And we would want them to redevelop the way that you illustrated the rest of the center. And my concern is if we approve a building of this size and massing, that it sets a precedent and that you could continue that going to the east as that part of the site develops. So I think you're really on track from a planning standpoint in terms of thinking about the center. And I think this site needs to reflect it. I think the architecture is on the right track. I think the landscape's emerging. Who knows where that will come? I think when you look at the master plan that you provided, and you look at the McCune route through, it ties like the front of Big Sandy all the way through to Village Parkway, theoretically. And you could envision that. Maybe it could be a street, it could be a pedestrian way, but that east-west linkage, I think, is really fundamental to the success of the whole plan. And I think by not recognizing that on the site, we're missing an opportunity. And I think you could get really creative with how that works. And again, I don't know if it has to be a street or a pedestrian way. There's a lot of pedestrian ways in Bridge Park, and where there's grade changes and you kind of step up as you move through the development. I think there's an opportunity there to do something really unique, to create that east-west linkage, to scale down the massing of the building, and to follow the code that's been set in terms of blocks and massing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Way. We talked a lot about code, we talked about vision, we talked about everything else. And I do want to take a couple of steps back to say, code is vision in words, right? It's very hard to say, okay, well, we have an idea that we want Bridge Park to look like this. We have to translate that into words. And what those words are the code. So we did hear quite a few times tonight that, it's this much off, it's 12 feet or it's 70 feet and that's okay. We're not, if we adhered strictly to the code every single time, we wouldn't need a planning and zoning commission because it would be a box check, right? It would be going down a list and that's what you do. And so with that being said, we look at every application and we look at the give and take in the application. We look at the complementary nature and we go back in time to before it was code, to when it was vision. And we look at, does it meet the vision? And I think that's some of what you're hearing tonight. We think it meets the vision, the architecture. You heard multiple times tonight, the architecture, it is a beautiful building. The way that the glass, the materials, the complementary, the reflection one side to another, the stepping down into the atrium area, that is beautiful. And that meets the vision. You heard open space. Open space, there wasn't very much on site. There was the private amenity, which is great for the residents. But the pedestrian corridor through a parking garage doesn't meet the vision. Pedestrian friendly, the mid-block corridor, that's for safety. We want activation at the street level. You did that great with the shopping center. Activation, that's the vision. The pedestrian through the parking garage, not so much. There's safety. There's the reason why we did mid-block and street grid is not because you and I could not walk the 250 feet around the building, the 500 feet around the building. It's because we have different abled people in the community, and we were concentrating that. And that's part of the vision of Bridge Street. We want it walkable, but we don't want it walkable by just a segment of the population. So again, we go down to the things that are right. Your cantilevered awnings, the fact that you don't have balconies hanging off of the building, but rather integrated into the building, the complementary nature, the hidden garages. There are so many things that are right with this plan. I think we just missed the vision on the open space. I think we missed the vision on the connectivity. The 12 feet without a park, the 12 feet without a mid-block way, I think those are the kinds of things that we as the Planning and Zoning Commission can put our smart hat on and say, okay, can we do that? Does that still meet the vision? But I think there are some things that we're just not able to overcome. And that does not mean that this plan can't morph and turn into something that is meeting the vision and therefore getting a complimentary, thumbs up from Planning Commission. I know that it's disappointing and I apologize. And I wish there were a way that we could provide more feedback early, but this is the concept plan and that's where we are in the process. And so knowing that, that earlier statement of if we can't move forward, then it might not develop, we don't want that either. We'd love to see this parcel develop, but it has to be developed according to the vision. And so with that being said, I'd like to ask Mr. Underhill and team if there are any clarifications that you seek from the commission this evening.
Kevin McCauley. Clarification just on, because it's hard to see on a map. If you dial into the green space or the open space or where people congregate, Warren, you said, we want places where people congregate. When you go back, and it's very difficult for you to see it on that, but when you look at this, not our sidewalks, we meet the Bridge Street. So if you go down John Shields and you park your car and then you have a green tree lawn and then you have a sidewalk, I think it's 8 feet sidewalk. From that point to our building face, we have anywhere from a minimum of 28 feet to a maximum of 55 feet before you get to our building to the curb. So when you're talking about John Shields and activating and having congregate in green space and open space, this is concept plan. So we haven't gotten to detail that yet. We haven't gotten to go in and say, this is exactly how we're going to activate that. We gave some ideas. Chris made some comments back of how those ideas may or may not work. All right, well, concept plan just says go back. But what we've said is we believe we can meet it on site with sufficient real congregate good space. Given that we have 55 feet plus 200 feet to work with, there's all kinds of things that we can do within that space. So that was one clarifying thing that I guess when I looked at this that I wanted to bring up to make sure we're all looking at, because it's very hard to see on that little map with the blue line on it. You just don't see the amount of open space that we are providing. The numbers will get there, but the detail will get there. So I want to be sure you look at that. Lance, one clarifying thing, that you asked Matt a question and you said, would this building be different if AMC weren't here? And he said, yeah, it might be, but in no way does that mean it would be two buildings. By way of example, when we broke this building into two and we first came in here, it was because we were trying to meet code. McCune Boulevard was there. We tried to meet code. We jammed it in and we tried to do that. What we then found with AMC saying, no, we're not going to do this, is we also had two very inefficient, expensive garages. So in order to make it efficient, and Dublin's participating in this and what money we can pay for and TIFs and all of that, that garage to have be a single floor is much, much more efficient than you could ever imagine than to have two separate garages. So it came as a result of saying, okay, well, we have a two garages because we try to meet code in McCune. But when we said we can't do it anyways with AMC, what's the best way to out of this? The best way, most efficient way is one building. How would it have changed though, if you asked Matt, if AMC wasn't there? We would have probably done one floor of garage because our residents, Warren, as you said, we're going to need about 400, 350 to 400 spaces for our residents. The garage has over 600 spaces, or roughly 600 spaces. That's to make up for all the extra AMC parking. So we have plenty of parking for our residents. We have over 150 to 200 in the garage alone that make up the extra spaces to do that because it's 2 floors. AMC's not there, we whack a floor and it comes down a level. But that's where we are. So when we say there is some differences, absolutely. But the building block of 500 feet changes in no way. It stays exactly the same. So I just want to make sure when you're clarifying that that's what we are looking at. We are looking at that piece. So the one point, if we go back and we clarify and we look at all of your items to say, what are we missing? It's the mid-block connection of breaking this building in half. And that's the only item, 12 feet, 500 feet. We'll get there if we have to. If you said that's the only one we're going to get. So we're really down to that one issue because it's allowed to be 6 stories. The massing is permitted per code. We're allowed to have a mid-building pedestrian way in place of a mid-block pedestrian way. The code allows for that. So we've met that code in every instance, other than the 15 feet.
Let's wrap this up because it's not worth it.
Okay.
You guys
I just
have-
want to make sure we have those on
You guys have
record.
any other, questions for me at all? The owner for 13 years, and I've been through all of this. Do you have any questions for me before I bring Aaron up? Because I love the Dublin Village, by the way. It's been great. It looks great too. It looks great.
Having closed the question period, unless the commission would like to choose to reopen question, I think that we are good, but thank you for coming before us. Mr. Underhill.
Thank you. I think at this point, that we understand that if this were an approval that really committed you to things, the answer would be no. And so procedurally, a concept plan, I don't know at what point, how do you deliberate and say, well, there's enough for you to go forward, understanding if we come back at the next stage with something doesn't look somewhat different, we're not going to get your approval then. But this voting on the concept plan I think this is the only place in Central Ohio that does that. It's another level from an informal, right? But I guess I don't have enough experience with being on the wrong side of this thing, which could be the case here, to understand whether there's enough here for you to even consider allowing it to move on or whether we'd have to start over. And I know you can't vote without voting, but you see where I'm going.
And just for some rundown so that I can summarize what I heard from the commission, the sticking points that we found were some minor deviations, the 13, the 70 feet, that sort of thing, but more pedestrian throughways, mid-block corridors, access on the principal front, the intensity and the density of the building, the open space, compatibility with the surrounding, the adjacent property entrance. Those were the strokes. And I think that there were too many of those broader, larger items for the commission to feel comfortable moving forward with an affirmative. So looking back to make sure I read the commission correctly, and I'm seeing 4, so.
But we're still going to have you vote, I think, but we understand how it's going to come out.
All right, thank you, Mr. Underhill. Looking back to the commission, any final comments before we move forward?
I think you said it very eloquently. I think my beef, and I think other people might agree with me, is there's just too much building on no matter how you tweak the space, there's too much building on too little space. It doesn't meet the character, but it also doesn't meet the usability as far as the open space and so on. So I think to me, that's the big problem, is there's too many units in too little space. And by the way, my number was 686, by the way, as far as people. Okay, you said something about cars. So if they all had a car, that's 686 cars. If they were all adults.
Mr. Boggs, did you want to add any clarification? We do have concept plan on our agenda tonight with a motion.
That is correct. And so while, there would be the option for this to be tabled if the applicant wanted to take it back and try to incorporate some of the comments that they've heard tonight and then bring it back for an approval. If they wish to have a vote from the commission tonight, it would be a vote on the concept plan, articulating the criteria that you're acting on.
So just for clarity for the commission members, especially because we don't have a lot in this direction, and I'll ask Mr. Underhill here his request. But if a member of the commission does not want to move the concept plan forward with an affirmative, they can still issue a motion to approve,
That's right.
put the motion before the body, and then each member of the body votes on the motion to approve. So those who did not want to approve would vote negative, vote no on the acceptance of the concept plan.
That is correct.
Mr. Underhill.
And, Mr. Boggs, I just want to clarify, if we are voted down, nothing would stop us, assuming we bring a plan back with some significant changes, nothing would stop us from almost immediately if we were able to file another application, correct? That's my understanding.
So nothing would stop you there. I guess it may be an issue where you would be paying an additional concept plan application fee to have a new application put forward and evaluated.
So a request to table would continue this concept plan with major modifications or not coming back before the body. And a motion to move forward, or a request for the motion to move forward, could initiate a new concept plan if you so choose.
Right. Okay. So I think we're happy to have you vote for somewhat complicated reasons. But anyway, I think we'll file, I just want to make sure we can file another application at a certain point in time. There's no waiting period, and I don't think there is, but if that's the case, fees aside, is that your understanding? Or I know, look at that code, you got to go read it.
Yeah, there's no waiting period to come back with a different plan.
Great. With that, we're happy to have a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Underhill. With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the concept plan.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Ms. Beal.
Mr. Way,
No.
Mr. Fishman, Mr. Shinnok,
No.
Ms. Harder,
No.
Mr. Schneer,
No.
Ms. Call.
No. And thank you, gentlemen. We do appreciate your time tonight. We do understand the level of effort that went into this, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing you back again. We'd like to also extend a thank you to the audience for coming and participating on this application. Ms. Holt, would you mind retrieving Mr. Supalak?
Maybe could we have just a couple of minutes before calling up the neighborhood guidelines?
Yes, that's just fine, though. We'll take a 5-minute restroom break for those who need it. Stretch your legs if you don't, while we prepare for the next item on our agenda. Well, ladies and gents, we ready to have more fun? All right, case 2 this evening, we have a discussion item. So Ms. Holt, this is an introduction to the proposed guidelines developed to address the neighborhood design standards for single-family developments within the city. So Ms. Holt, thank you for the time and preparation going into this, and I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Call, and good evening, everyone. As mentioned, this is a presentation for discussion prior to making a recommendation, which we anticipate is going to be coming in January or shortly thereafter. And these are the neighborhood design standards, and I think it always helps to start with a bit of a problem statement and kind of remind ourselves as how we got here. And the item of concern is the PUD intent language, and the code talks about various goals. And these include develop an opportunity for mixed land uses, respect unique characteristics of a site, protect natural and cultural resources, provide imaginative architectural design, and establish the proper relationships between both land and structures. And both this commission and city council have noted that the city is still not getting the desired creative results for these single-family residential PUDs. And we're seeing, for example, that our applicants are relying on the minimum residential appearance standards, which are really meant for standard zoning, not for negotiated planned unit developments. So we wanted to establish some future expectations for residential PUDs and provide greater specifics about how to meet that broad intent language that is kind of nebulous. So that is the problem statement and why we are here. Before we jump into project goals, as a reminder, staff held workshops with both the commissioners and city council liaisons in January of 22, and that was to determine the goals for this project. The comments and the rankings are provided in your packet under the synthesis document, just as a reminder of all of the different ideas that were discussed. These were confirmed via email in February of this year, and then these became the specific goals that are translated into the draft guidelines that you have before you tonight. So to go over these goals, they are and were to ensure a better PUD product as intended by code, to maintain flexibility of direction and avoid being prescriptive. We don't want to avoid missing out on wonderful opportunities that we just haven't seen or thought of yet. We want to be able to capture different scales of concern from neighborhood-wide to the individual lot. We want these to be organized simply and work repeatedly for both staff and the applicant's benefits. And again, we want to allow new ideas, especially for infill projects. So that kind of sets the stage about where we are. And looking at some project milestones, this history is outlined in your memo, but just to hit some highlights here, the project has been carefully developed over a number of different months, and again, using input from this commission, from our liaisons, and then we did hire a very skilled consultant in Dan Philibom to help us out with this. The project has been recently discussed with the Community Development Committee 2 times, and their input has been added and confirmed back in November. So you are seeing the latest and greatest and best vetted of this project. So moving into the project products. Based on the identified goals, 3 levels of focus really became obvious for the project, and these are color-coded throughout the document. And I want to run through these because these will be a recurring theme. The first is the public realm macro, which is indicated in blue, and this is the project-wide broadest scope ideas that we will be talking about. These guidelines state that open space will serve as a framework for the neighborhood. This was probably the highest ranking communication that we received from everyone. And this would function much like the conservation design ordinance. And I'm going to talk about the differences between that ordinance and what we're proposing here in just a moment. But this approach by definition allows preservation of natural and cultural features, which was also a very important idea. The framework plan determines the relationships between the open spaces and the entire neighborhood, which goes directly back to that PUD intent language. It also ensures the incorporation of open space within the community and not just on the perimeter. And it also touches on guidance for stormwater ponds, and we're going to talk more about that in specifics in a little bit. Moving on to the public realm micro, which is in green. This area is where we're seeing streets as public assets and outdoor rooms, if you will. It's how you experience the community when you're walking, driving, biking through, whether you live there or whether you're just passing through. It has everything to do with community perception, which was also a big idea. Here we talk about specifics on how garage scapes, if you will, are mitigated, and the provision of front porches as transitional private to public spaces. We talk about other possible transitional elements such as landscaping and hedges. And then also included here is the diversity of architecture, and that also directly gets back to the PUD intent language. For the private realm, which is in yellow, this is the most fine-grained scope that you will see in this document. It focuses on individual lots in 2 ways. The first is to look at unique lot and product arrangements within a block. And this is what creates that interest and diversity block by block that the PUD intent language talks about. We also are looking at individual lots and making sure that each lot can accommodate each proposed building and still have room left over for private open space and things like air conditioners and patios and pools and things like that. We've had a number of issues through the Board of Zoning Appeals with those concerns. And then we wanted to make sure that this information is simple so that homeowners, staff, and boards and commissions can understand it and quickly come to an in or out decision. So as promised, let's talk about the conservation design ordinance a little bit. There were lots of discussion points with the Community Development Committee on how this ordinance would apply based on these guidelines. So a little bit of background about the ordinance. This is intended for sites with significant natural features, especially along rivers and along metro parks. And this was developed about 10 years ago. My understanding is that it came about when Glacier Ridge Park was first being assembled. So not every site in the city is going to meet this locational criteria. Not every site can meet the ordinance's numeric criteria either. There's a lot of very, very specific percentages and that if you have a small site, it's going to be very difficult to meet that. So by contrast, the open space framework in these guidelines applies to all sites of any size, whether infill or greenfield, with or without natural features. And we wanted to make sure that we provided an opportunity to get the same ideas and approach to development, but on every scale, not as limited by the ordinance. So in order to bring these two related but different ideas together, staff commits to and is recommending at concept plan, there will be a determination made between both staff and the applicant about the applicability of either the conservation design ordinance or the open space framework. And then in the planning report, we will explain the justification for why those decisions were made and bring that forward to this commission. Further, at preliminary development plan, there will be additional refinement of either direction, whichever was chosen, and discussion about, how that approach has developed and improved and matured through the process. It's important to note that if the conservation design ordinance was chosen as the best approach for dealing with open space, the rest of the guidelines would still apply. So that's how they kind of intermesh. It's also important to note that regardless of the role that the conservation design ordinance is expected to play in this process, through the housing study that is being worked on right now and the community plan update, we are expecting to get some further direction about how and where to use that ordinance. So that decision is not finalized yet, and it will be an evolving process as those documents come online and are adopted. All right, so moving back to our guidelines, this is taking a look at some elements of the macro public realm. And again, this is back to our broad open space approach. And here's just a few examples of how the guidelines would work. And the best way to describe it is it's a Macargian design with nature approach for each site, so that we can see that the natural features are incorporated into the very first decisions about each and every site. We want applicants to show that work to us so that we can confirm it and make sure that all the various aspects that are listed within those guidelines have been taken into account. Again, the objective is to create distinctive neighborhoods whose open spaces and streets are organized around the natural features. So as we said before, this approach is scalable to both large greenfield sites and small infield sites. And again, this is just a few of the overlays that would be expected as part of this, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at here. Moving on to the micro public realm. And again, this is the street as an outdoor room, having to do with experiences as you travel through the neighborhood, including pedestrian experiences, the semi-private realm of your experience from your front porch, and architectural diversity. So here on the left is a photo that it depicts potential solutions for better pedestrian streetscapes. It shows the interface or the transition between the public open space, the porches, and then the private space of the house. And the language within the guidelines is really to spark that creativity and get people thinking about very specific ways that, again, that intent language in the PUD could be met. The graphic on the right indicates various garage location options to avoid those garage scapes that everyone wants to avoid. And this is especially where the residential appearance standards have often been relied on, I think to the detriment of some of the projects that we've seen come online recently. So other examples include a true mix of housing styles within a block and architectural differences beyond just the materials. Finally, this is the private realm. And as we said before, we're relating to private property in two different ways. And the first is how the individual lots relate to one another within a block, and then how each lot's individual elements are arranged on that lot. So this particular example is for a narrow lot. There are many other examples in the document, but you can start to see how a block might feel and how a pedestrian might experience this and how individual homeowners might start using this lot or groups of lots. Looking at each individual lot in the same graphic, we can see that there is space for the largest proposed house. We're going to be confirming that, and that there's leftover space, again, for pools, pergolas, patios. And on these narrow lots, you can also see that we are requiring that those air conditioners or mechanical units must be located in the back to avoid those conflicts side to side. Along with the adoption of these guidelines, some code amendments will certainly be necessary, and we're asking for your feedback on these as well tonight. We have 4 that are proposed here. You may have additional ones. Stormwater ponds, as we mentioned, were a topic of discussion. There's a feeling to maybe not have them count as part of the open space, the required open space in a project. We are looking as staff to craft some language that might keep an option open for really superior design. If you think back to our original goals, we don't want to hamper ourselves or prevent something fabulous from happening. Also, during the interviews, no one was opposed to higher density if better design went along with it. So we would propose taking a look at the 45% maximum lot coverage that is part of the PUD code. Perhaps if we allowed higher lot coverage under certain circumstances, we might open up the opportunity for different housing types, different products that we hadn't seen before. So that would be something to consider. During our interviews, everyone agreed that landscaping plays such an important role in neighborhood character. And therefore, we're thinking of a PUD code amendment that would allow flexibility in street tree placement. This could affect maybe the mature size of trees and the rhythm on the street. Perhaps it's on both sides of the sidewalk. Perhaps verges could be larger on one side, smaller on another. We just want to offer that option to, again, spark some more creativity. And finally, the current code permits the use of easements and setbacks as part of the required open space. The downside of that is that it often leads to straight, unimaginative, alley-shaped open spaces around the perimeter of a project. So we see a code amendment that could direct how those would become part of that meaningful open space framework that we've already set up for an individual project. So we appreciate the Commission's feedback on the following discussion questions, and I know we're getting a little bit late. I'm not sure if I need to read them through. It's Ms. Call at your discretion here.
We do have them in front of us this evening, so I'd like to defer to those.
Yes, and I am happy to leave them up so you can see them a little bit longer, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And because I anticipate this being more of a back and forth than a traditional questions and deliberation, I'd like to do public comment first if there is any. So if we've received any, or
We have
any.
not. We have not. And just checking, nothing has come in.
Okay, perfect. All right. Then because I see this more as a back and forth rather than a traditional ask questions, deliberate, I'm going to suspend some of the formality of the meeting, and rather than go through and essentially try to get everybody in one swath, have more of a guided dialogue, if that makes sense. So discussion questions have been drafted, and of course, the one that I like to add on, if it's not already added on, is there anything else for consideration from the commission as number 7. So I'd like the questions to guide our dialogue, and then we'll keep the any else as number 7. So we'll go through with the first one, do they address the concerns raised? So out of normal fashion, I'm going to speak just a little bit to introduce and then hopefully start the dialogue. If we remember the impetus for why we're talking through PUDs, the purpose of PUDs in my history, and I believe in their history as well, is to provide flexibility to negate some of the strict requirements in one area while complementing the requirements in another. So it's kind of a give and take. And in recent history, what we've seen is just the take and not the give. And so with that in mind, as we go through these questions, I want to keep in mind, we typically get a little less than the bar. And so if we are suspending 45% lot coverage, for instance, then we can expect as a planning commission to get applications that now barely don't meet the bar, while the bar has a perception of being lowered. So with that in mind, I'd like to go through other commission members' opinions on, do these guidelines as presented to us, do they address the concerns that we've brought forward? Again, understanding that the PUD idea is to allow more flexibility that's not prescriptive, and I believe you called that out in the staff report. Does this meet with that 3-segmented macro, micro, and private? Does that meet the requirement, the request, I should say, from the commission? Mr. Suplag.
So I'll lean in. Let's agree. This is a daunting undertaking in and of itself. Anytime we rewrite a code or a portion of a code, only in so much as what we have existing today is time tested, right, and time refined. And of course, here we are, a whole pile of these rules and guidances that, on one level read appropriately. We've ran through case studies up to this point and sound really appropriate, but we don't have that quite as much of the time-tested nature of it, right? Trial by fire kind of orientation. So there is an aspect to this that is difficult, and we have to rely on staff to have sorted through a lot of the deep nuance, right? And I'm fully confident that you did sort through the deep nuance. What I am very satisfied relative to specifically number 1 about is the primary intent that you set out with this, the goals that were, the objectives were, that were at the front end. There might be some pieces, parts that might not hit the mark exactly, and we'll probably refine over time past this point. But the fact that we set out with that intent, the fact that some of the really macro moves in order to set the neighborhood in motion and really change that conversation, which is really the fundamental conversation we have to change relative to, you know, some of the downstream nuance. I think, to answer the question, does it? Yes.
Okay. Looking to others, again, concentrating on discussion question number 1.
So hats off. I think this is a great document. And I think this will serve Dublin really well. I think the way that you've broken it down, the way that you've made it clear, and the different categories of space, as I went through it, I have 1,000 comments that are really just more picky, like, maybe we should think about this. And I think we can have that conversation at some point. But I think in general, it's a great document. This is guidelines, right? So the teeth that this has is, you know, it's guidelines, right? There's flexibility. I think that's the intent, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So it's great in that respect. I really appreciate that. And I think you did capture, generally all the things that we had talked about. But, one of the things what I really appreciate this is because this is what I do for a living, right? And the things that you've captured are things that, if you're a professional, that you should be guiding whoever's doing the development in that way. And I think the whole sensitivity, that it's not just about open space, but open space as a performative component of development in Dublin, is that if you do the right thing, you're doing it in an environmentally sensitive way, and that you're fitting development in an environmentally sensitive way. So I think that is a kind of an overarching, I feel really good about where that's taking us, right? And I would suspect this is a document that will continue to evolve over time, right? There'll be things that, oh, we need to do this, or we need to say this, or so I think it's great overall, really supportive of it.
Ms. Harder.
I would agree too, just being new on commission and going through this document, there were several things that kind of came up throughout the time that this really would have reflected on it. And the one thing too is I like the idea of the natural features and keeping that into a perspective too. So I'm a yes.
Mr. Schneer.
I'm going to jump ahead. I think that the whole document, I can answer all these questions. The effort is incredible. I think if we're not unique in Central Ohio, I'd be surprised. Like Mr. Way, I had some couple typo things that I sent earlier.
Of course.
I made them up, but no. And I have some specific comments, and I just wonder if there's a better way. Is this going to, will it come back? Is there a way to make this more efficient, and maybe rather than take the whole commission's time, like I've got a question on this page and a question on this page, whether we can just submit them and then.
I kind of wonder if either we do submission or we do breakout, where you meet with 2 commission members at a time, get their feedback and that sort of thing, because I fear in a document this size that we would lose, baby with bathwater, but we also, Mr. Way has a very, a large talent with some of the open space and the incorporation that I would not have. Mr. Schneer, making sure our T's are crossed, our I's are dotted, while he also has design elements and is not limited in that sphere. I think that we would get a lot out of those individual comments, but not necessarily in a public meeting where we're going person by person.
We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. And if I might suggest to start with the idea of individual members either sending written feedback or oral feedback to staff, rather than trying to schedule 2 at a time and taking the risk that we inadvertently find ourselves in some arguably round robin meeting situation.
Understood. So the one item, I know we struggle with how we're doing calculations. Are we doing open space? Is it sensitive lands? Are we preserving? I know I've brought up before, I just brought up my previous city is what Dublin was 30 years ago. And it is between a lake and a mountain range. So you can imagine the sensitive lands and everything else. So there are calculations. We went through study after study and consultant after consultant, and there are calculations that allow us to say, okay, sensitive lands, if it's city-owned property and you're improving it, if it's sensitive lands in a detention basin with no access, how much of it percentage-wise counts as open space? How much of it can be calculated? And I think that there are things that are overly prescriptive. So you have to have a category A, category B, category C improvement. I think some of it's overly prescriptive, but I think that we could leverage some of the learnings from that. So I'll send the link to the publicly accessible code.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So I do want to go through the questions at a high level, understanding we're going to have subsequent discussions, but this is a lot of work. And so I want to make sure that we as a commission are at least voicing the overarching opinions on each of the requested discussion items. So number one, I think we covered, and I think we were all of the same. Yes, I think you understood the desire of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the city as a whole. Number two, any recommendations for the macro level? And the open space, I kind of jumped ahead with the sensitive or the other portion, but anyone else from Mr. Chinook?
I would just add that I think the open space, it comes up consistently where we talk about, and brought up tonight, about active open space. I have a really hard time with stormwater being part of the consideration of open space, because we're trying to activate these outside areas of these different developments. I think we just need to think a little bit more about how we
Yeah, well, and that might come back to tether to the calculation, because I'd be willing to allow that to a certain point, right? There's going to be sites that are going to have so much water that it's going to be like an entire lake and you can't use it. I would also add stipulations. I think you might have actually said it, Ms. Call, about stipulations about how it's developed and how people interact with it, not just we've got a pond.
So there are many stormwater facilities around Dublin that are actually dry, and they're designed with flat bottoms, and people are using them as soccer fields or kick in a neighborhood. So I think there's a provision, again, it has to do with the design and all that.
But it also has to be designed for it so that you're not trampling, so that the plantings in it or the natural grasses or anything can recover, so we don't end up with a dirt swimming pool.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's right. There are fields that people use when, they're dry beds. But to the point of, I think there's some nuance there and stipulations and calculation adjustments that have to, I think, be considered around.
I think that's back to the flexibility. I think we should keep it open as an option.
Agreed.
If it makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And we look at trees in some of those areas too, where we talk, to me, there's a delineation between active space and open space.
And one other item on open space, I think that we have to, even though the city does a very good job at code enforcement and that sort of thing, I think we need to address open space while we have the requirements, also the maintenance in perpetuity of those requirements. It doesn't do the city any good to require a park if in 10 years the amenities of the park are no longer usable. And so understanding who owns that in perpetuity, whether it changes over time or not, establishing that it is open space and that it's qualified open space ought to be at least discussed in the code.
So I have another one, and so I think I've lost track of where I might have put it in two places, but the connectivity issue with when you propose open space and trails in a development, what do they connect to? And I think there should be a requirement that shows some larger context, like this trail will connect you to school. This trail connects you to a playground. This trail connects you to a commercial shopping. We keep seeing proposals where they put in a trail, but I don't know what it connects to. How does it connect?
Trails for the sake of
Agreed.
trails.
Agreed. All right, looking, and if you think of anything else, let us know. But looking now to the next one, item 3, the public realm micro. Again, this is interaction. These are the street lights. These are the perception as you're walking through that public. It's not within the private home yet, or the private footprint yet, but lot layouts. And, you know, you'll see in the reference material, one of the things that I called out as my least favorite or anything along Highland Croy, because they were all cookie cutter. Every home in the development looked the same, and every development from one to another looked the same. And it was all, okay, we'll do the minimum width of the lot. We'll do the minimum depth of the lot. It's 2-car garage with a 2-car driveway, and everything looked exactly the same. So that micro, I think it does matter. And it's the character of Dublin, and whether a developer wants to say, well, you know, this is what sells. Well, that's great. That's what sells today, but what's going to be here in 5 years and what's going to be here in 10 years. And I don't know about you, but most of the homeowners that I meet aren't looking at just today.
So I had 2 things in this section that I think are interesting, is that when you typically think of streetscape, you think of a street right of way with very tight edges. But I think in your example here, to think of the streetscape as maybe not just a linear, but capturing space on each side of the street. It could be parallel. It could even be, you know, different shapes. But to think of the streetscape, I think you've kind of got that built in here, but.
And I think that plays into the, you know, we do call out, you know, park strips and that sort of thing, but those don't have to be consistently linear. We do a great job with the spoke and wheel, the turning streets, but all of our sidewalks are the minimum width off of the street, and they have the minimum number of trees in them. And so that undulating or meandering sidewalk doesn't just have to happen through parkland.
The other thing I was going to bring up was, and I think you said it earlier, Sarah, about the spacing or how you space trees, or to not be cookie cutter. And I do think, though, that we need some thinking about what's the minimum. Like, trees need a certain amount of space to be successful. So there should be something about they need to be at least this far apart, unless you're trying to create some interesting effect. But I'm not sure we should be promoting that. And also varying species. I mean, a lot of the streets in Dublin are all the same trees, like Terra Hill Drive is all honey locust. But what's happened over the 20 years that I've lived there is trees have died, and they've come in, and thank God they put in different species. So now we have a street that's very eclectic. And also, not every tree has to be a shade tree. Like, maybe at intersections I think maybe that's getting too in the weeds on this, but I think that should be a desire of what a street should be. It shouldn't be just a monolithic thing. You should think about a series of spaces as you move along the street that either are defined by intersections or some other unique feature that can really make it not that linear monolithic environment.
And stepping out of the specific application, that doesn't just apply to PUDs. So if we could ask staff to look back at tree replacement, especially our park strip trees. A lot of times we do like for like, but again, to Mr. Way's point, I don't necessarily think that's always the right decision. Not saying it's wrong every time, but that variety does, well, provide variety.
Mm-hmm. And that just to kind of jump in on that enthusiasm, that is exactly what we were thinking about, that, you know, not every street has to have a canopy tree. It could be a double row of ornamentals that are placed much closer together or on both sides of the sidewalk. And it could change the feel of a neighborhood completely without really doing that much.
And one piggyback item is stepping away from trees just a moment, the public realm. And again, These are to help developers bring forward residential projects that are pleasing to the city, that are long-lasting.
Yes.
How many times we hear about people want a big house on a small property, they don't want to maintain their yard, they only want a two-car garage. I can hear that all day long from developers. But if we learned anything from Oak Park, which is big house on small lot, how many variances have we granted because they don't have space for a patio? They don't have space for that private living that is the micro level public interaction. And so we appreciate that developers say, this is what people don't want. Our experience is different. And so making sure that the guidelines represent the difference and not the stated desire.
Yes.
I'm going to make your job real hard here in a second, because I'm trying to withhold judgment on the tree bit, right? But at the same time, I love driving down Earlington and all of them being lined up, right? So it's not
Well,
one or the other is not bad, I guess is what I'm getting at. There's time and place for both of them. Upon seeing that sort of question, the way you wrote it out, right? How do we feel about the trees in particular? I don't know which one it was and whatever. I kind of wrote the commentary of, we probably need a standard rule or approved equal that does X, Y, and Z. Right, so that at least, so it's not willy-nilly in this world as much as there's a standard, because there is a kind of standard across the city and on these street trees right now that is pretty nice, given we have mature trees. And the few times on my street that a honey locust does die, they put in they put in a sugar maple in its place, and it's sort of this odd duck for a bit, right? Good, better, and different. But
at the same time, I think that Earlington, where it's kind of a minor arterial, the shade trees, those are placemaking almost. And then on my street, I live on Maynooth, this little tiny, almost cul-de-sac street. Yeah. We have honey locusts, and we have one of the narrowest street widths of any approved street widths in Dublin. And they're all honey locusts.
Yeah.
So maybe the ability the different roadways.
I was just tempering our advocacy for, a variety of trees. And across the city, yes, of course, a variety of trees, but there is a time and a place for having the whole street being a boulevard of
Typical
lovely.
architect.
What's that?
Those columns, right? Consistent.
I want to design it all.
No,
yes. So I don't know what that means. It's flying, this ointment, but I would advocate for, I don't know that we give them carte blanche willy-nilly here. I think a standard rule around this, which we probably already have, right? And then, or approved equal that does.
The prevailing wisdom, though, since, I don't know when Earlington was built, 1980s, from an arborist standpoint, and I mean saying from a landscape architect, that varying trees is healthier in the long term for the whole ecosystem, as opposed to having a monolithic species.
And just to temper, these guidelines are to help PUDs when they're coming in. And so the very nature of a PUD is it's going to come before us, and we're going to see it. We're going to be able to have input on this. So it may be this is in Earlington and it fits that homogeneous.
Yeah, there's a time and place for both.
But we now have the flexibility, not just our body, whether that's us sitting in the chairs or someone else sitting in the chairs, but also we now have a guiding document to prevent developers. So they're not saying, oh, okay, I am blank sheet crayon, let's come up with my own way. But rather, here are some things that may be acceptable given I'm bringing a project forward in the city.
Yeah, that's well put. Well, and the other caveat I'd say here too is right, we've all been out sort of in Marysville that was basically communities built on a farm, right? Like cleared of trees, and it is just dearth of any trees at all, right? And it's now a lot of those communities have been there for quite a while, 10, 15 years, and there's nothing mature there. So
All right. Anything else on that public? I think you did an excellent job with the AC units. Some additional clarification on corner lots, because we get that a lot where, oh, it's in the rear yard, but it's in a corner lot. And so I know code addresses that, but calling that out in the guidelines may also save us some headache down the road. So anything else on micro public
Yes.
realm?
So there's specific language in here for alleys and ensuring that there's 20 feet between the garage and the travelway. So if you add that up on both sides, you've got a 60-foot or 64-foot dimension, which is really quite large. I would like, as for flexibility, what you can do is you can introduce off-street parking in between garage clusters so that the garages don't have to have that 20 feet.
I would challenge you to go down to the Hilliard Grand and see how that's executed.
Well, it has to be done well, but I'm just saying I would just like to see the alleys consume less land, right? So you can put it at the fronts or wherever, as opposed to having a 60-foot swath of an alley. That's not a typical alley. Like you go all over Columbus and the garages are right on literally the pavement, right? So I think I'd like not make that a definitive standard, right? Is to give some flexibility.
Yeah, but again, the standard, they're going to ask for flexibility anyway. And so, hey, we don't think that the alley needs to be 60 feet, but to go into the recommendation, the guidelines saying you can have 40 and they come back with 35. Of course, I'm using a comical number.
It's a density issue too. I mean, it's allowing for more density. So I just think it's too prescriptive to say that.
I would go with taking the number off rather than lessening the number and say, alley products may be considered, while safety and proper density and that sort of thing are under consideration. I'd rather go, I realize they're guidelines, and so that's kind of against the.
Are you saying wider? You want the alleys wider? Is that what
No.
He's saying he wants them narrower.
Okay.
But you do have to solve for the intent of the 20 feet is to allow them to park a car in front of their garage. So you do have to solve for the parking all of a sudden, which
there's room to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Which would be kind of a secondary stipulation that would be about.
That's why the Hilliard one, I mean, the idea was 2 spots in between every garage. I mean, it works out in your head math wise. It's
Again, it says to look good.
Yeah,
there's an
it's
aesthetic.
probably a ratio of bedrooms
Hilliard It's just over it's right across the Dublin border in Hilliard.
Have you been down those alleys?
Oh,
They're not very successful.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what they're saying.
that's what I'm saying is.
They're saying it's not successful.
We shouldn't encourage alleys.
That's what my point was.
You did
He
right
wanted
here.
to lessen the demand, and I see that as being
Now you got it.
the developer saying, ooh, this is going to cost me less money to build.
Well, that's what they're doing. That huge development in Hilliard where all those alleys, there's trash back there, there's junk cars. They're terrible.
Just on another note, I was thinking about sidewalks and traffic calming, but with sidewalks on some sides, you can have a really large one and another one, you can have a thinner one. It just gives you different dimensions. You might be going another way. And I kind of like that idea when you're thinking about with that. And a lot of these are about traffic calming too, making it look like, oh, I'm in a neighborhood. And so I'm appreciating part of that. And I guess later we'll talk about the side loading garages too, but that was also on my mind. Thank you.
And just one tying back comment, my comment about the meandering sidewalks. And while I appreciate that, the absence of sidewalks, I understand Muirfield. I lived in a development out west that was the same idea. It snows in Ohio. And so anytime you need to go anywhere, we plow our sidewalks. We do a really great job, but if there is no sidewalk, there is no walkway. And where we have kids walking to school, we have people who want to walk their pets. It's one of my pet peeves, and I will again talk about the perimeter and Avery Muirfield intersection where you walk up from a walkable community. It's high density. It's Crawwell and whatever the perimeter lakes and everything is. You come up shopping center and have to cross to get to the other shopping center. And so this side doesn't have a sidewalk. This side does, but there's no crosswalk. being able to think through pedestrian walkways and how that connectivity interacts in the public-private realm is critical.
That's because they were patch meal. They did, Merrifield came in, no sidewalks, and then they said, well, we want sidewalk down Merrifield Drive, so they put sidewalk on one side and bike path on the other. It was patchwork. So you're right, we need a plan for the whole area when development.
Yep, agreed.
Sorry, I didn't get my question in on the alley issue. Do we have to address alleys in here, or can we leave it out? And because to me, when you put it in here, it says, "Oh, well, we can, alleys are encouraged." Does it have to be in this document? Do we have to? Because I mean, I think I'm a little I am against alleys because I don't think they're not typically look that great, and we end up with some situations we might not like. I guess the question is, does it have to be?
So you're not advocating for garages in the rear then?
Correct.
Oh.
So I think that they can be there, but I think it needs to be a may, not we encourage alleys, because that takes it as, hey, we want these. Alleys may be used, but here are the stipulations, here are the guidelines if you choose to use them. And then we maybe keep the safety, that amorphous level. We're going to hold you to safety concerns. We're going to hold you to landscaping. We're going to hold you to enough parking, those kinds of things that will come up with an alley loaded product.
I think that's a great idea.
A little semantics because
Yeah.
it's listed first. So I'm like, oh, wow, well, we're pushing alleys. But
Well,
Yeah.
I think there's a pattern of density that would, that really
Or-
needs to have
Or
alleys.
the city
That's-
needs
I
to
just
take
create a
them up
streetscape
to
that's
standard
just
or make an
houses,
exception. And
landscapes,
So
Sarah, I think that there's another micro thing that I actually
Yes.
had in the back. And this came up in one of our things that we've reviewed. So if we're promoting the alleys again and rear loading units, this idea of clustering houses around a common open space. I think one of the problems we had with the project that was submitted is that those houses still need to have a sense of being on a street. And so how far back from the street do you allow those open spaces to go? I think there should be something dimensionally that says if you create a cluster of houses around an open space, there can be no more than X units on it, or how many feet back from the street or something.
X distance to a street.
Well, again, the project we reviewed had these, like there was units.
Agreed, but they
10
were
units back to get, that were off the street.
They were linear. Well, and the odd thing is, I'm going to say this is, you've got some lovely images in here, Sarah. They do have exactly what you're referring to.
Yeah, it's actually the last page. That's why I wrote my note back there. You have the
Which page number, please?
44.
Norton Commons, well, 24 as well.
Oh, okay.
On page 24, you can actually see it. So you can see the street. You can see the commons in front of the house. Right?
I'm still getting to 24.
Oh, yeah.
So to the right, and Norton Commons in Kentucky is in this a couple times. So is Tennessee Westfield. Thank-
Franklin, Tennessee.
Right, but again, to get this result, you would say X distance from front door to a delivery street, however we define it, right?
I think it's an address. Well, it's an address street to some degree, right?
There you go. And then even in the case of if you did sort of a round, right, you would still have a proximity distance from front door to an access street.
What page are you on?
This is 24.
24.
20. Oh, I was one off. Sorry. Okay, yeah.
So if you look right on the right side, you can see the street.
The cars.
Obviously,
yeah, but I'm thinking of something that's perpendicular to that. So there's an open space that comes off that street, right? That all those houses are related
Like
to
on
each
a
other.
reverse cul-de-sac where the cul-de-sac is open space and.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly.
Yeah, so but even in that case, and where I was going, so this is a linear example, but the distance, we could set a distance, proximity distance there that defines that. And then to your point, even if you did it around and had a cluster of homes around a green, that street that goes by it, right? That half circle.
that you
You
could
still
look,
have a proximity distance.
right, you can look from the street and you can see everybody's front doors that you want to walk to, right? When you,
Right. So Amazon would stop at that point and run things back.
Can we get to a dimension or something that defines that?
Well, look at that.
That,
It's a dump.
that
Look
book
at
that I
that.
gave you, I lent you, had an example of that in
It's the
it.
first sidewalks.
I think it
Yeah.
was,
You put one side.
it was like 3 houses, 2 on the back, and then 3. So it was like 3 houses deep is what it was, which I don't know what, on a small lot, so whatever that is.
I mean, it's really just to your point, Warren, it's really just converting their front yard into a common. Like that's what's occurring right
You
here.
might as well have one sidewalk down the middle. This looks kind of stupid. I think.
Well,
I'm just saying it's
sidewalk
relationship to a
sidewalk logistics aside,
Yep.
I mean, we were concerned about it relative to the, why am I drawing a blank on Amlin
Oh,
Inland
development,
Mhm.
which didn't have, and all of a sudden their front doors were going to become their back doors, and it was going to become a problem. But this stipulation all of a sudden solves that and creates some really compelling sort of commons.
Well,
And
and
scale-
the
and
delivery street, I think, changes the game.
Yeah.
Because they were talking front door to front door with open space and no delivery, no nothing, then your front door does become your back door.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that it does, it scales the open space down so it's more intimate.
Right.
It's not this massive
Mhm.
thing that, again, you don't have any relationship to your neighbors.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on the the public micro? And again, we're not looking to get all of our comments out this evening. We'll do that.
I'm sorry, I have one. It's kind of, I'm struggling with it because it's in the micro. I'm going back to the garages, right? Where a lot of what you're doing is causing garages not to be the frontmost element, which kudos, because again, I forget what you said, the garage scape was the language. And in the past, we've run into that a couple times, so it's captured here. We talked about sort of proportions of when the garage is in the front, the proportions of it. And what I'm struggling with is there are a couple communities that I actually think are pretty good, do it pretty good, right? There's one right by the Jack Nicklaus statue to the right side. Like some Muirfield, right by the fire station. They actually do it pretty good where the garage is front facing. They have, I don't know, 50% garage, 50%, you know what I mean, a porch. It's not bad. It's not a bad product.
Mm-hmm.
That in choice locations around the city would be agreeable. I feel like there's one over here, actually by the high school, right across from the other city building. There's a pool that's sort of central. It's just a loop.
By the high school.
Yeah, mentally go past Kaufman, turn towards Emerald Campus, right? In that corner of Emerald and Kaufman,
Woodland Grove? Willow.
Willow Grove, and there's like a pool where you drive. If you ever drive back, it's just a U.
Yeah.
There's a pool in the middle. It actually to the problem we were trying to avoid of the garage scape, they also solved it pretty well. So it does work and does create this nice little community from time to time. But right now we have completely excised it out. Is that good? I'm not advocating good or bad because we've been trying to, using every weapon we could to fend them off when they're really not done well. Is that good or bad that that's completely excised now?
Can we take that as a takeaway and just look at what other options there may be? Because garages have been something that we're sensitive to. And I do appreciate the incorporation of the 3-car because that,
yeah.
Yes, thank you for illustrating that.
You bet.
All right, other things in micro. Okay, moving on to the private realm. I know we did touch on, the private open space setbacks. There was a little bit of, I noticed you incorporated, we went through a lot of deliberation on the 6, 8, 14 combined, but the first paragraph reads 6 and 6 alone. And so dovetailing those and kind of combining them, I think would do us due diligence. And for the newer members on the commission, one of the issues that that we went through was 6 foot has kind of been the standard for a long time. And so when we were looking at applications years ago, probably when Mark and I first started, the presentation was, this is similar to, and then it would be built and we go, that doesn't look like that. Well, they built bigger than the standard. And so we encourage staff with a code amendment to change it to 6 and 8. So no 2 6s abutting to get that extra 2 feet, but still allow for the extra density because 6 foot is not a lot of side space. And so 6 foot was for proper drainage, but the 14 feet also gives a little bit extra space for mechanicals and such. Anything else in private realm? Thank you again for the side lots. Buildable area, I know we've talked about a few times. Mr. Ray.
The thing that you kind of put in here, which I find interesting, is you stepped into the way that people landscape, or front yards are landscaped, and you've got some guidelines around that. Every homeowner is going to want to put their own personal touch on their front yard, right? But it's nice to have something that's similar between, so there's consistency. So I've actually worked on projects where the developer would supply like a hedge along the sidewalk, like you talk about in here, and that every lot has at least a hedge, and and you can do whatever you want after that. But that's something that talks about developing some consistency in terms of landscape. I mean, that same developer also did a fence, right? And just did the same fence, and then the rest of the landscape was whatever people wanted to do. But something about creating some, and maybe that's talking to the uniqueness of each development. Like how are you going to make each lot feel like it's part of this development, right? What's the consistency?
Landscape, community, outlay, species, something that speaks to opportunities that the developer can say, ooh, I like that idea. Because if you're a landscape architect, you may grab onto that. If you're, looking at design materials, obviously we don't want somebody to grab onto one design material and build the entire development. So we want to stay away from some things.
It used to be everybody had the same mailbox.
Yes.
Which was, hopefully we've got over that, because now they're all gang mailboxes. And right?
Well, in new developments, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that's going that way, but yeah.
Okay, anything else? Buildable area, I'm still, when we're in residential neighborhoods, when we're in kind of the R3, 3 units per acre, I still am sensitive to the overbuilding, because the developers like to overbuild, and then we run into the issues of, well, somebody wants to add on this and can't, and so we're looking at variance 4. So I think it would be in our best interest to go back and look at the variances that people have asked for, whether they've been granted or not, and make sure that we're considering that with our guidelines. Other items in private space? Okay. Additional design solutions recommendations? I'll send the point system thing off for open space. And then I think you heard earlier, but I'll give the commission any opportunity to echo this, but great job. I mean, this is a lot of work, and it's very hard, especially when you're talking to many differing people with sometimes very strong opinions that don't always agree. So thank you for the effort that goes into this.
Dan did most of the work, and
Kudos, Dan.
Golf clap.
It's a great effort.
Yes, thank you very much.
I assume that when you get applications now that they do have a lot of the analysis information. We see that, right, where they're doing obvious things like floodplains, but they're also documenting all the existing tree cover. And what I don't see come out of those is somebody actually then defining a developable land area for it's
exactly.
And I did make a note about that, because when I go through this exercise, it's to get to that developable land summary. Like, here's the areas of the site we can develop, and that's what we need to focus on.
That's the missing link.
Previous lives, our case presentation, so to speak, would include a building envelope for each of the developable developable lots, at least to give the barometer to the commission. Are they taking advantage of 101% or are they going 75%? You know, at least to help us to understand what the developer's doing. Again, back to the 6 and 8 versus 14 side yard setbacks. That's kind of eye-opening when you're looking at two applications, they look very similar, and then what's built has vast differences.
Is that a process question that we can require them to do that?
Well,
could that be part of this document?
That's the intent of this particular graphic that's up now is we want an applicant to show us two things under this private realm section. Is one, how do the lots and the potential homes work together to create interesting blocks and show us that maybe a single family house might be next to a duplex or some other kind of interesting form of house.
See, I think the struggle that we've had is developers will come forward and they say, well, we don't know what product a person's going to choose on this lot. And that's okay because they already know what the lots are going to look like. We don't need to know what product they're going to choose. We need to know on a lot by lot basis, regardless of what somebody chooses, what is the building envelope of that lot?
Yes.
Because we're smart enough to know, okay, if you have a 40-foot wide lot, which is not acceptable, if you have a 40-foot wide lot, you cannot put a 60-foot wide house on the lot. And so by presenting that, here is the development of 120 lots on so many acres with so much percentage open space, and one graphic that just shows what the buildable envelope is in each one, whether that's colorized like this in yellow so that we can see the sidewalk, the streetscape, the open space.
And that gets back to my question is that you said you want it, can you require them to submit that as part of this?
At their
We
application
can,
submission.
because it's a negotiated process. And to your point, Rebecca, the second part of this graphic is show us how the largest house that you are going to be offering as a choice in this neighborhood can fit on each lot and still allow adequate area for the pool, the pergola, the patio, so that we don't get those Oak Park examples where everybody's stuffed in there with nowhere to go.
Yeah. So in the design guidelines, if we could add in a portion that is, you know, with private lot elements, a submission in the application should include a building lot envelope, a building envelope plan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the same as the setbacks and everything else that they give us in different graphics, but now it's a
We'll
single
clarify
page.
that. We'll clarify that.
And I was stepping back one step and saying if you have 100 acres and you go through this analysis, there's a 20-acre parcel here, and there's a 20-acre parcel here, and there's 20 acres here, and we're preserving 40 acres.
Yep.
And from our standpoint, if we see that there's an effort to preserve all the natural character, whatever it is that they're not building on, then do we start to think about density different? Like of the land remaining, if you're preserving all the space, do we give them? We say, well, in a PUD.
I would think that would fall into what we get right now with open space.
Is it?
We don't have developers who come forward and say, oh, okay, well, we didn't call out that tree stand as open space, but we're going to keep it open space here. Usually they say, okay, and this tree stand and this little strip right here is going to be open space. And usually they call out down to the micrometer.
Yeah, well, again, I don't know if it's happening now or not, but I would like to see that process. I don't think we see it.
Right.
And I think there could, in terms of the analysis, I think there's some other layers to this, like identifying, this doesn't talk about soils. If they did a soil analysis, they could tell like wet soils versus, you can tell where things can be built and where they can't. And there's, of all from the vegetation survey, do they do invasive species versus native species? And I don't know.
Mhm.
It's things like that
Yeah.
I think we could get a little bit more fine grained on that would help. So.
I struggle a little bit because I don't know that micro level is necessarily, I wholly agree with the open space, the tree stands, that sort of thing. But the soil composition, I just don't know if that's within the Planning and Zoning Commission's purview or if that's within staff,
No, but it's
engineering, that side. of things.
analysis that's defining what's developed. So I did this plan for a site at Buckeye Lake, and it has this particular type of soils that you should never build on. They're just wet, and we had actually soil scientists come in and actually define them, and that actually set the area that we could actually build on.
Agreed, but that would go through like engineering and that department.
We don't ever see that, and it would be nice to know, I think. Do we see that?
Let's give that some thought.
Okay.
Let's give that some thought.
We in our 2-on-2.
We might not need to see it every time, but when it's pertinent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm just worried we'll get mired to Rebecca's concern. We'll get mired. It's extra information we'll get mired in. And agreed, soil studies are always every site. But until it drives a sort of unique dance on the site,
right?
Are we worried about
there's
And
a checklist, right?
The resulting factor, the resulting factor of not buildable is they're not going to build on it. So therefore it's going to be non-built land, open space land, called out something different. And so that's what I struggle with because we already see that. It would be the same as like AUP. While that doesn't necessarily dictate, we see it because it's unbuildable because it's within an easement. And so therefore it's called out as part of an easement, not necessarily, if that were unbuildable, that's.
I'm just saying that I think we're developing on areas that do have sensitivity, and that would be
Mhm.
better not to do it if we knew what the parameters were of why.
I was equating easements to other wetlands, other unique stipulations that would make something unbuildable.
Like,
Now I've got 85-foot
Right.
poles back there.
Yes.
They changed it.
Yes.
They changed their standards. Now they don't allow things.
So perhaps we could, we're going over the schedule for next year. Citizen U, I think, was a very good opportunity to get introduced to the different departments, but perhaps there's an opportunity to have a little bit deeper dive with different department heads in understanding what the purview is. So for instance, if in the city of Dublin, we don't do soil studies and we do allow buildings within that area, understanding what we do and do not cover in whether that's single residential, commercial, large scale residential, anything like that, may be in our best interest as a Planning and Zoning Commission or just for educational purposes.
okay.
All right, other items on the private considerations. Anything else on support or other considerations? And again, awesome job, so thank you. All right, this item I do not believe needs a motion. Let me get my.
It doesn't. It is for discussion only.
Perfect.
Yep. The motion comes later in January.
Understood. Well, and please, if you have feedback, send it into staff and then we'll work on individual communication so that we don't
Yes.
run the risk of impropriety of
I
any sort.
think the easiest, fastest way to maybe get started would be by email and just send in your thoughts and then we can kind of see what the scope is and if we need to flesh it out some more.
If there are any uncomfortable with email, I'm sure that staff could make themselves available to individual meetings,
Absolutely.
but
Yes.
email is nicely facilitating.
It's a good way to start and then we can kind of see where we're at.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, moving on then, we do have the schedule. Thank you very much for supplying also the other dates, different things going on in the world and on the calendar so that we're taking those into consideration. Does the commission have any hesitation, any items for consideration on the meeting dates for 2023? Okay, this is an approval action, though I don't have a motion here, so I will ask Mr. Boggs. It does say approval of meeting dates. Are we general head
Yeah,
nodding? Or are
so
we?
just a motion to approve the
Okay.
meeting dates as presented.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to approve meeting dates as presented in our packet.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Ms. Beal.
Mr. Snare,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Shinnok,
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as if you have not heard me talk more enough this evening, is there any other communication that anybody wishes to share? Mr. Will, you're not jumping up to.
Staff does not have any communications.
Well, thank you again